you recently deleted TikTok.
That I did.
Um,
Technically, I deactivated my account, but I won't be getting back on.
yeah, yeah. Well, this is crazy news for the unemployed, as the kids would say on there. They are all freaking out over the fact that you've deleted TikTok. I think a lot of them come to assumptions as to why it happened, really. So why don't you tell me why exactly did you go ahead and deactivate your account? I already know. We already talked about this. We talked about this for
Mhm.
hours the other day, but let's give them the straightforward answer.
Well, that's the funny thing is I've heard all sorts of because I was beefing with somebody during that time, and there's all sorts of crazy rumors, and we'll get into that too, like how people make up stuff about your life. But there's all sorts of people talking a bunch of crap, saying that I deleted TikTok because either I was beefing with somebody or this or that or whatever, and it literally I woke up that day, and I think right now social media just kind of sucks in a way in terms of engagement or just growing or any of that kind of stuff. And it's been a lot of time reading data, digesting data, putting stuff together. Chris and I do that, and then we do that with the podcast. But the thing is, I just feel like TikTok has really become this just huge space where people are just arguing all the time. Nobody's really learning. There's not good exchanges made. So I was like, I woke up that morning, the morning that I deactivated my TikTok for good. And I said, I'm going to post this. I had worked for like a day or so. And I was like, I want to try to give out this information about why, you're not going to grow off slow eccentrics and put it in a really digestible way so these kids can read it and they can understand it. And I was like, but you know what? I'm so tired of every time that I post something up, that it's just them coming in like trolling me and spamming me to argue. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to help you understand something that actually makes your training outcomes better. That's what I do. You and I've talked about that. I'm not the science nerd that just looks at science and is over like jacking off over like something that doesn't have a practical application. I don't care if I'm like, because somebody will send me a study that I'll be like, what's the practical application there? How can we use that to make our training outcomes better? And
Yeah.
if it doesn't has that, I really don't care. So I'm like, here's this content I'm going to make, and if I post this up, I'm going to check it like in a couple hours. And if it's just a bunch of kids arguing, and I think they're going around right now, one of the things they get on these trends, and you know this, where they just start repeating each other, saying really stupid shit. You know what I'm talking about? And right now, it's the whole can I tone the muscle with high reps? Are you seeing that one that's going around? What if I just want to tone the muscle? They're saying that, and then
Are we're
they'll
back
say how
in?
many. Yeah, they're doing that again, and it's like how many micro tears will that get me? And it's just like they all repeat. They live in this echo chamber, just like they all run around with the same outfit on in the gym, and like they just repeat the same stuff over and over. So I woke up and I was like, I'm going to post this. I'm going to check in a few hours. And if it's just a bunch of kids posting that stupid crap and they're just arguing with me, I'm just deactivating my account. And of course, that's what happened. So it's not any deeper than that. I just got tired of like, what's the point of me posting there when nobody's learning anything? People are just showing up to troll, argue. There's a multitude of like, dumb accounts who are so weirdly. I even sent you that one guy, it's like Nick the Hypertrophy Man, that his whole account is he's just obsessed with anything I say.
Oh,
It's
the kid that's like a TMZ reporter.
That's what you called him, yeah. And I'm like, he's so obsessed with anything I say. Like he made one day, and he's like, I almost missed it, but everybody tagged me in it. And he's like, Paul Carter calls out TNF, and I'm like, I didn't call out TNF. It was the last sentence in my caption because when you make any type of content, Joel's army comes over and tags him 1,000 times in it. So it was more like just like I'm just joking around. I'm like, yes, that goes for TNF too. So because it was just me making a joke about the fact, and then he's like, he made this whole thing about I almost missed it, but Paul Carter calls out TNF on the new upper lower split meta, and I'm like, you guys are. It's the level, the room temperature IQ shit that's going on there. I just could not deal with it anymore.
It's crazy to me because I'm just like, who gives a fuck about any of this? And like, it's all out of context. It's all misinterpretation of things. But then you make content about this stuff. Like it's literally like a TMZ article. It's what the
Exactly
fuck are
like
you?
that.
What are you
Yeah,
doing?
the fact that you nailed it that precisely was fantastic, and I'm like, that's exactly what it's like. It's like turning on TMZ, and I think that it's just they tag other people to try to drive drama and arguments. And I tell
Hmm.
people, don't do that on my account. Like I'm going to give you the data, and I'm going to say what I'm going to say. If you try to tag people to create arguments between us, I'm just going to block you. I'm like,
Yeah.
because I don't want that on my account, because I'm going to give you the data, and this is my expectation out of you, which is clearly a very low expectation that doesn't get met. And that is, you do some critical thinking and deductive reasoning about the data I'm giving you. And like I give you the PMID, or I give you the name of the study, or I give you the information. You can use Google, you can use Google Scholar, you can go out and look this stuff up, and then do some deductive reasoning as to, hey, do you feel like this is correct information or not? And the other thing about that honestly has just got annoying is kids won't even read a caption. They won't read a study. They go and they get a blurb, or like a caption, and you know this. They get one piece, one sentence from an account they follow that they think's a smart person. There's way more dumb people than smart people that are doing this. And when I say doing this, I mean creating hypertrophy related content or strength training related content. There's way more dumb people. I wake up
100%.
every day. There's only a handful of people that are creating intelligent content. And so I get up and I'm like, well, what's the point of doing this, on this platform when nobody's really here to learn? So it wasn't any deeper than that. It wasn't about, I've had a million beefs with people. I don't really care about that. I'm not going to get off a platform because I can block people, which I mean, I have to do daily. Like you said, we'll talk about that. But it wasn't any deeper than that. I was just like, I'm sick of posting content here. Nobody cares about learning. Nobody actually is here to apply any critical thinking, or deductive reasoning. Nobody's here. They're not. They don't even read my caption. So I'm just getting trolled all day by a bunch of little kids, and I'm
Hmm.
like, there's no reason. So I got rid of it. And I know you took a hiatus from social media. It was a while back, and then in that time you taking that hiatus, you went through the same shit where it was a bunch of people making up all sorts of lies about why you took a hiatus.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I took a hiatus because of the situation with me competing, and as soon as I got off stage, just like what was happening with the comments incoming, I just wanted to tune it out. I was like, I'm not even going to entertain this right now. I just need to, just be present, be with the
It's
people.
called protecting your peace.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all. That's all it was. People are like, "Oh, like he's trying to run away or fucking." I don't even know what they were saying, but
But
anyways,
but
when that,
here's the thing: at the end of the day, Sebastian, it doesn't matter. You have every right to say, you know what, I got ready for this show. Whatever happened, happened, and I don't feel like dealing with people who aren't in my life, that don't know me, don't pay my bills. That these are not going to be the people that are going to sit at my bedside if I'm sick or if my life gets turned upside down, and yet they think that they're entitled for me to have to answer to them. So if your thing is, I'm going to get off social media because I don't feel like dealing with this shit. I checked on you during that time. I'm like, hey, dude, just let you know, thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay.
yeah,
But they don't. Those are all the majority of these people. It's kind of like Reddit. Reddit's the biggest cesspool on the internet, in my opinion.
yeah,
It's
100%.
there's actually a sociological study that has looked at Reddit and said that these people that are on Reddit that create fake accounts, anonymous accounts, and hide behind them to make up gossip and lies about people's lives and troll people, it's a mental disorder. Because it has all of the fittings of mental disorder. So I just want you people to know that you're on Reddit, that you hide behind those accounts and you talk about people's lives, make that stuff up. That you literally have a mental disorder.
Yeah, they're all. You could think of the exact same person it is. It's some incel who is sitting in his mother's basement. Is broke as fuck. It's nobody that is actually successful in any aspect of life is going on Reddit behind fake accounts and is talking about other people, gossiping, making up shit that's entirely not true with nothing to base it on.
Nobody, dude. It's always, and the thing is, there's a consistent theme, and that's the reason why that this group was able to determine this in the sociological study that the behavior traits are also similar. That's how they were able to eventually like just classify it as a type of mental disorder. And it's always like a private account, right? It's always a private account, usually no picture, depending on what platform we're talking about. But it's just such gross behavior. And it's like you're saying that nobody who's out there and crushing life and doing like, like running a successful business or has things in their life that they wake up to each day where they're very content, and they feel good about, um, how they're living their life and how they're going about each day. They're not getting on Reddit to talk about to make up gossip about other people's lives. I cannot imagine. I sit up at night, watch dog rescue accounts. I'm already setting up my life for the next 5 years so that way I can get out and rescue, create a sanctuary for older dogs. um, like I have these plans and aspirations in my life. So you can't tell me, I'm like, oh, well, let me see here today. I'm going to wake up today and, oh my gosh, let me go stalk these people. It's crazy to have stalkers. And I've had stalkers for a long time. It's crazy to have, it's so crazy. And like, I'm going to go stalk this person. You're going to let me rant today. And here's the other thing I'll get at. Why do you follow me if you don't like me?
Because
I don't. I
they
don't. I don't follow anybody I don't like, Seb. I don't. I don't follow a single person I dislike. That is so crazy to me that I'm going to go follow and stick on every word of somebody I don't like, and then they'll be like, "Well, you give out good information." I'm like, "Then shut up." Here's the
Mhm.
thing: if I followed somebody that I did not like, but I like their information, I would not go troll them. I would not go troll them. I wouldn't. I'd be like, you know what? I don't particularly like this person for X, Y, or Z, but they're really good in their field and I like their information. So I'm not going to go troll them
Mhm.
because they're giving me free information. They have to do the work for to assimilate and then put into content and give out. So if I dislike them for X, Y, or Z reasons, and there's people out there, for example, I don't agree with like politics. And if they post something on politics or whatever, I just ignore it because I'm like, well, I value their information. And so I'm not going to go troll this person or I'm not going to go, let me go create this argument with this person. That behavior to me is very odd.
It's immaturity. I think we see it a lot more in the younger demographic. Obviously, it's everybody, but it's obviously when I come across this stuff on my account, I look on it, and 9 out of 10 times it is somebody that is younger, at least around my age, maybe younger than me. Oftentimes it is younger than me, but I think it's just the way
They're
that they're
always they're
raised.
always they're always younger than you, said. They're always younger than
it's
you. They're
the
always between 16 and 22.
It's the culture now, and they internalize things on social media, and they don't know how to really just block out something they don't like, or you say something they don't like the way it's delivered, and makes them maybe feel like they're not so intelligent. So I don't know. It's they guess I guess they feel a need to have to make a comment. I'm the same way. Like if I followed a guy, if I followed you and I like the shit you're posting, but you say something, I'm like, oh, this guy's an asshole. Like I in no way in my mind am I gonna go into your comments and start saying like what am I retarded? What does that do for
I
anything?
don't. That's what I'm getting at. It's like if I people post stuff all the time that I follow that I don't agree with, but I don't actually go in and argue with them. I just let them have their say, and I go on about my day. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, okay, he thinks this. Okay, that's fine. I don't go into their comment section and start crap with them or start arguments with them.
Yeah.
And so that behavior is very odd to me, and
I
I've never participated in that.
I think there's also just such a huge gap in knowledge between the people that are receiving the information versus the people that are giving it. So somebody might come in and they comment all these stupid questions that are it's like
No,
you
no,
could do
no,
your
but
own.
that's another reason why. Yeah, I'm gonna let you run off on this rant too. But that's another reason why people all over like they literally say stuff like Paul Carter's a terrible human, and it will be because I get somebody ask me legitimately dumb questions, and they think their questions are not dumb. And I'm like, you can ask a dumb question. This idea that some questions are not dumb is ridiculous to me. Of course, there's dumb questions.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if I give you a bullet pointed caption and you won't read it, and then you ask a question that's answered in the caption and admit that you didn't read the caption, then you're dumb
Yeah.
because you're not even willing to help yourself. And then they're like, "Oh, you should answer." There was a kid on TikTok that said, "I won't answer all of the questions, and it's my job." And I'm like, "It is not my job to answer all your questions on social media. It's free content, bro. Lots of creators. Sean Nalloway goes and posts everything he does. He just posts them. That he never answers. He
Yeah.
doesn't say anything in his comment section.
It's
But
entitlement.
the entitlement is insane. They're
Yeah.
like, you're supposed to answer all our questions. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't have to answer anything.
Yeah.
And I give you a caption where I've already sat down and spent who knows how much time in order to kind of assimilate that down into kind of just a bullet point stance that I can give you so you can actually have something to work with. And then they ask a bunch of questions and they ask a bunch of stupid questions, or I get people that just show up to leave like trolling type comments. And so if I made a very open stance, and I've had a very open stance about this for a long time, if you come to my account and you troll or you like those trolling comments or those shitty comments, I just get rid of you.
Yeah.
here's the thing and then they always run off and they always cry on other accounts that they got blocked for I just disagreed with him. You know how many screenshots I've sent of people where they're not disagreeing, they're clearly trolling me or doing ad hominems or whatever. And I'm like, you guys always leave this part out where you either said something like you insulted me or you literally insulted my family, or like you always leave that. They always leave that part out.
Hmm.
And I've made it very clear. I'm like, if you come and you leave those kind of comments, I'm just going to block you. And if you like those comments, I'm just going to block you too. And then they get mad. They're like, I didn't even say anything. But I know what you blocked me for. I'm like, because there was some shitty comment and you liked it, so I got rid of you.
Yeah.
And I'll give an analogy here. If you came over to my house and you walked into my house and you started insulting me, and it's like, say like, oh man, your house sucks, you suck, fuck you, blah blah blah, and you start talking like that, I'm gonna say you got to leave. And if you have friends with you and they all are supporting you in the way that you're talking, I'm going to make all of you leave. And so if you come to my account, that's how I see it. That's how I see it. I don't go to your account and talk to you like that kind of way. So I don't go to your account and like troll you and like start arguments. No different than I wouldn't walk into your house and do that same thing either. But if I walked into your house and you started saying stuff that I found like, I'm like, oh, I totally agree with this in a way that's super argumentative, I would just leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I grew up in a time where we people like fought a lot. So like that was a big thing. It was like when I grew up in the time that I grew up in, there was always the undercurrent of the possibility of violence.
Yeah. We
Now,
talked about this.
yeah, there's always the possibility of violence where I grew up, and people were like, "Oh, that's the end." No, I'm like, that's just men. That's how men were, and that's how it was. Like, go all back to the Western days. Like, I remember it was the Dave Chappelle skit with did you ever the Rick James one where Charlie Murphy was talking about how Rick James slapped him, and he's like, "You don't slap a man." He's like, back in, he goes in the if you slapped a man back in the like the Western times, that means you had to have a gunfight after somebody had to go. And I remember thinking, like now kids can say whatever they want and they don't have any fear of repercussion. And I did not grow up in a time like that. I grew up in a time where there was always the undercurrent of the potential for violence, meaning if you ran your mouth off to the wrong person, he might beat your ass.
Hmm.
So there was a level. I always think that creates a level of basic level of respect between peers. Like when you're like, if I run off at the mouth like this, that dude might beat my ass, or maybe I can beat his ass. But the fact is, you don't always know, or just the fact is that you are going to have a scuffle. And
Hmm.
then afterwards, it's squashed and settled, and you have respect for each other, and you're going about your way. But there's a level of respect that ends up getting cultivated in those environments, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Obviously, because you know that if anybody's name is in your mouth, that there is a possibility of an altercation occurring. And I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, that's really the reality of today with what's going to happen on social media. Like, obviously, these kids know that's not going to happen. So
Right.
there's no way to convey that to them. But when you are aware of that, like back in the day, I mean, I'm only 25, but even 10 years ago, it was different, right? To some
I think
extent.
it's definitely gotten worse even in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Whatever this Gen Z generation, and I think you fall right on the cusp of Gen Z. But I do think if you're 25 to 28, it's a little different than how the kids are now, like 16 to 21,
100%,
22.
100%. But even if even you just don't want an altercation to occur, there's that level of respect there where it's just like you just have decency, right? And I think that
Mhm.
decency isn't there anymore, and it's just kind of like a free for all. And fuck you, I can say whatever I want, and it kind of just it became this. It resulted in these all these guys that are essentially just acting like children still. Like nobody can act like an actual
Well,
man.
that's actually what they say about. So when I troll them back, they're like, they're like, they'll say something like, "Well, you're in a 16-year-old's DMs." I'm like, "You actually started this." I'm like, "So you
Right.
don't like it when you get trolled back." So my kind of what's fun for me because they'll show up to do that, and then I'll troll them back and just block them, or I'll just read it and just block it. All depends on my mood for the day. But the thing is, the weird thing is, or not weird, I don't do that to anybody. I don't
Yeah.
go to anybody's DMs to start shit with them. I don't go to anybody's account to start shit with them. But they always find me, and they're always like, this is another one. It's like you limit your contents. I'm like, no. Instagram has a feature that says unless you're following a person, you can't comment. So I turn that feature on. Um, but the thing is, at the end of the day, Seb, any of these kids that come to argue with me, they don't. It's kind of like the bulking thing that's going on right now. It's like I'm like, okay, give me a citation that I can read, or whatever. They don't. They create a bunch of emotional based arguments.
Well, the reality is if you have a conversation, the way that I always say it is like, how would this conversation go in person? Would you say exactly what you're saying right now in this manner? Because in almost every scenario, that's not going to happen. And most of these kids would just shut the fuck up and listen, and that would be the end of it, really. But
Yeah.
they just want to keep barking.
No, I mean, the thing is that maybe they would, but the problem is, I don't know if you saw the Jason Kelsey situation that happened at Penn State, where that kid called him. He said, "How does it feel to know your brother is a faggot for dating Taylor Swift?" Which is such an odd statement. So how did like generally that's
How does it feel to know your brother's a faggot for dating Taylor Swift?
yes, that's what he said to him.
What?
That's what he said, and then Jason turns around because he was a center for the Eagles, right, for like 14 years, and takes the kid's phone and smashes it,
Mm-hmm.
and then gets in his face. I really wish he would have beat the kid's ass because that's what he needed. He really needed that. But my point about that is, where does that level of disrespect? Like Jason Kelsey is like pretty much loved by everybody. He's just
Did
walking in.
people think he was in the wrong for doing that?
You know what? Because social media is so weird. There are people like Jason Kelsey shouldn't have resorted to violence. I mean, violence. He broke his phone. He took the kid's phone away from him because the kid was filming him saying this stuff, and he broke his phone. And then he got in his face afterwards. And Jason said back to the kid, "Who's the faggot now?"
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was funny. But the kid actually pushed Jason at one point when Jason was going down to get the phone off the ground. And as soon as that kid would have put his hands on me, dude, I would have beat the brakes off him. But the kids they're like that now. There's just like this no, even like I said, amongst just men in general, it used to be there was some level of, hey, we're going to have a level of respect, just a level of respect between even enemies that we carry with each other. But if you're going to run your mouth, we might go off. But now they'll just sue you or call the police or whatever. So
That
there's
was that was oh, you never did that.
no,
Never did that.
nobody ever.
You're a
And the thing
bitch.
is, nobody ever. Like I said, if you ran your mouth, like you're gonna throw down.
I
And there
got
was no,
pushed. It's assault. I'm gonna call the police and sue you.
yeah, exactly. He
Insane.
put his hands on me, so I'm like, well, you shouldn't have been popping off at the mouth. Frank Mir actually talked about this in a reel too, about this exact problem. It was talking about a guy who was on a bus and was harassing people, and then he put his hands on him and put him in his seat. And it's like that's enough. And people actually, this guy was harassing women and old ladies on this bus, and Frank Mir put his hands on him and put him in his seat. Frank Mir was a UFC fighter, and
Mm.
people were like, "Oh, you put your hands on that person?" I'm like, "That's what you guys are really talking about?" Like he stood up for women and old ladies here that are getting harassed by this dude, and you're talking about him putting his hands on a person? Yes, put your hands on him.
Mm-hmm.
We're so backwards as
Sure.
to how like this just
I've
it
seen some
just
of those videos of the guys who go out and like set up predators, and I've seen some comments under those videos because though it just blows my fucking mind. Where if they try to run away, like they might try to tackle them. Yeah, this is
I
obviously
saw you see
it's
the one where the guy was trying to leave, the guy actually like bulldozed the dude into like a pillar in a house, man.
I'm not
And
sure. I'm not sure,
yeah,
but the
but
people
you
will
go to the
literally say,
comments and they'll be like, "You shouldn't assault that guy." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
"Yeah, leave it to the police." You know, that's assault. I understand what you're trying to do, or what. It's like, shut the. Are you fucking
Dude,
retarded?
and
It's
I
just
know the first
crazy.
thing I do is that's how bad it is now. The first thing I do is I go to the comment section and be like, I know there's going to be somebody taking up for a literal sexual predator.
It's insane. This is what we've come to. Everybody is just that soft now. There's no circumstances. Uh, there are 100% circumstances, in my belief, and I'm sure you'll agree, and I'm sure many other people agree, where violence is 100% warranted.
Violence can be golden. It just depends on the situation. If somebody were breaking into your house to try to kill your family, are you not telling me you're going to? When I was actually in MMA and I was doing combatives and stuff like that, I did that stuff for a long time. One of the sayings that we had is "grieve violence with more violence." And that was one of the like that's my point. If somebody's breaking into your house and they want to kill your family or whatever, you have to bring more violence than they're willing to bring. That's what
Mhm.
you have to do. You're getting me back in my primal mode talking about that this morning. But like, that's what are you left with at the end of the day? If you and your girl are going through an alley and some dude wants to kill you and rape her,
Uh-huh.
you have to meet his violence with more violence. That's
This
what we
is
do with
this.
us.
It really does come down to that. It's funny because you made that point, and this is again what a lot of these kids don't understand. And granted, maybe they don't have to understand it because they're so fucking protected and soft now. But when it really comes down to it, it doesn't matter what the fuck you say. Nothing matters. What matters is, can you beat my ass or not? Because if you can't, that's the end of the conversation. Like that is what when you get down to everything, you want to argue all you want, you want to say all this shit. It's like if you were here right now, you were in person with somebody, like what is the worst case scenario? Like, can you defend yourself or not? It's just that's what really
And
everything
believe it
comes
or
down
not,
to.
that's how I talk to you. I've read this funny thing. People are like Paul threatens people online. I'm like, I do not threaten people. I tell them if it's that important to you to talk to me in such a disrespectful tone, here's where I live. Like you, and like I'm like, and my point about that is very it's just simple. It's not threatening the person. I'm like, just show some basic respect, for us as men amongst each other. So
Mhm.
like I wouldn't show up in your DMs and talk to you that way. Like even if I could, we're talking about even if face to face I could beat your ass because as just a basic form of decency. But they will show up in your DMs, your comment section, whatever, and just talk to you in a way they 100% would never. They wouldn't talk to you that way in person if there was a situation where there could be no ramifications for your actions. You see what
Mhm.
I'm saying? So in other words, if like they can't like call the cops or file press charges or sue you or whatever, and they're talking to you in this incredibly disrespectful way and insulting you or insulting like your kids or your girlfriend or whatever. So like if a guy comes into your house and just starts like insulting your girlfriend and there's no ramifications, then you're like, well, I'm about to beat the brakes off you. You're about to get it. And that's my basic point to them about this is like, why are you showing up in my DMs to troll me? Are you that bored? And the flip side, I'll have some days where I have a certain amount of empathy because I'm like, that's not normal behavior. And like clearly, like these kids are they probably get bullied somewhere, and they end up like resorting to that kind of stuff. So I believe it or not, I'll have those moments of empathy where I'm like, maybe this kid has a parent that's abusing them or they're getting abused at school or maybe they've a lot of like hurt people. That's what happens, and maybe a lot of them are responding off in this way because I do think like for example cyberbullying is a real thing. Having daughters, I watch my kids go through that like in school, especially having girls are terrible to each other as far as like character assassination and stuff like that. It's brutal, like they're really terrible to each other. So I do have like these moments where I'm like, man, maybe this kid is just he's taking that stuff out on me because he has stuff going on in his life that's really terrible, and not he's not mature enough to know the difference. So but at the same time, I think a huge part of that is because I grew up in a really tough time in a tough environment. But again, what creates a level of respect amongst you and your peers and other people is the fact that you just knew not to pop off and run your mouth. And I think that I can't remember, it was a psychology article that talked about the more the more dysfunctional a person is internally, the more protected they are, the more that dysfunction will reveal itself. So if you put like we were just talking about, if you put somebody in a situation where there could be violence and no ramifications for it, the amount of dysfunction they're willing to show drops pretty much to almost nothing,
Mhm.
right? And then if you put them behind a phone where they're 1,000 miles away from a person and nothing can happen to them, they're super protected. Their dysfunction will just come roaring out. And then there's different levels of this. So one was like if you look at like in the service industry, like if somebody's like you look at how people treat waiters, waitresses, people who are in kind of a servitude position to them. Watch and see how they treat those people.
Mhm.
And if they're really kind, nice, generous, respectful, that means this person probably is not very dysfunctional.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it really comes back to the fact that nowadays, with the generation of people, it's just an entirely different culture, and it's a lot of them have a lack of adversity. A lot of them haven't ever been hit, and I think that is honestly something that does develop you to be better. There's like a level of shit you have to go through to, I guess, have a standard amount of, I would say, emotional intelligence to be able to function on a basic human decency level. Otherwise, you're just completely unaware of everything, and you end up like this, where you think there's no ramifications for anything, and you say a bunch of crazy shit, and you just seem
nothing, nothing ever happens.
yeah, yeah, and it's a lack of emotional intelligence, and it's just I think it's all due to how these kids are being raised now. It's the environment that they're growing up in. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I can't.
It's
You
hard
got
to
to pick
pinpoint
your.
it.
It really is. It's why I try not to be because it's not my specialty. I mean, I do read. I used to read a lot on sociology studies and how people function and behavior stuff, and it's why when the whole narcissism thing was going around, I'm like, you guys don't actually understand. Narcissism is a Class B personality disorder. You can't just like label somebody a
People
narcissist.
just throw these words
They
around.
just throw it. They learn a word. They learn a word, man. Like for a few years there, every girl that has had an ex boyfriend that was a narcissist. Remember that when that was going around? It was like every girl you talk to, my ex was a narcissist. I'm like, how do you know he's a narcissist? And they're like, well, he lied and cheated. I'm like, so you dated an asshole. You dated
Uh,
an asshole, not a narcissist, an asshole.
I think the
Um,
biggest one is the ego. I always you see that everywhere. Always his ego is
mhm.
huge. It's like, do you even know what you're saying right now? Do you know the reason why you're commenting that on the page is you're deriving this from your ego? Like, this is irony within itself that you feel the need to go and talk shit about somebody on the internet. Is that
Right. That you have
what
to
is ego? What are you talking about?
that you your ego's so big you have to come to my account to let me know how big my ego is.
Yeah, if you didn't have so much of an ego, it wouldn't bother you at all. You'd be sitting there
If you
unbothered.
had, that's a really great point. If you had no ego, you would be like, hey, and that's my point. We just got to earlier. It's like I think we all have a little bit of pride or some sense of there's some a scalable metric that we live on as far as egotistical attributes. But when you have more of an ego, you tend to go around trying to force your opinion on other people rather than just allowing them a sense of autonomy in their own beliefs or whatever. Even if you feel that it's wrong, their perception and reality is that it's correct. Those are objective moralities. Those are objective stances to work from. So I'm like, they're like, well, here, I'm going to give you the facts. Kind of like, with everything happened political the last couple of days. And people were saying, you're so science based and you didn't do any research on, politics. And I'm like, you're right. I didn't do anything. I read nothing I didn't live this for the last 4 years. I didn't read anything
Mm,
because I spend all of these amount of hours looking into physiology and biomechanics. I spent no time on politics at all and actually looking into the crux of matters. So and that is because if I say something that it brushes up against their own belief system, and then they feel very triggered by that, and then have to come at me, and that's their ego. That
hmm
is their ego because I'm
Yeah.
like, here's what I believe, and I know why I believe this. It's kind of like, if I give somebody the information to do with anything, how about anything works from a physiology perspective. I even said this, I think it was to Brett Contreras the other night. A few years ago, I was probably way too quick to post out like content or information without having done like more due diligence on some of that stuff to get more granular. But I tend to take a lot of time out now to really look into what it is that I'm kind of interested in and really figure out all of the different mechanisms and kind of what's going on there before I ever mention it. But when it comes to that egotistical or what people calling you ego, I don't really. If somebody posts, it's like that Keanu Reeves thing. It's like I'm at a point where if you post something on your social media that says 1 + 1 = 5, I'm like, cool, man. That you're right. Enjoy yourself. But if I post stuff, I'm just like, just take the information, figure out if you want to do your own due diligence, go figure out, something that says and a study somewhere or some type of data that says, hey, maybe that's not right. And if you have something good, I'm like, send it to me. I'll go, that's happened before. But generally, I don't miss on stuff much anymore because I'll take a lot of time out to look through stuff. And then I've had to stick by a lot of stuff that I've said the last few years. And I think there's been 6 major studies in the last 2+ years. And I've got predicted the outcome of all of them.
hmm
So I think that people have finally started giving me some credit for that. I see that more. They're like, so basically, Paul Carter was right about this the whole time. So
Yeah.
I get that a lot. So, but it's definitely an ego thing when people feel like they have to come to your page to set you straight.
Yeah, no, of course. A lot of people just have the. Again, it comes back to emotional intelligence. really the lack of awareness. Everybody has an ego. We all have ego. It's just, are you aware of it or are you not? And this is, coming back to, you said when I took that break off of that hiatus from social media, I remember one of the things that was being said is everybody was, oh, I'm glad he lost. He has such a fucking big ego. He thinks he's gonna win everything. Like, everybody was kept saying that I had a huge ego, and they say it just because I speak highly of myself and I say, I know I'm going to do this. I know I'm going to do that. And it's just because I know what I have to tell myself to push myself, whether that's ego or not. Like, I'm completely aware of it. But then the fact that you feel the need to go and write a thread about it on Reddit,
I guess
what is that?
none of those kids probably have been around elite level athletes. If they think that's ego, man, I've spent time with some of the greatest athletes in the world. You should hear how they talk.
It's like, I don't care
Like
who's showing up. I'm going
the,
to
the
win. That's what I'm
sense
going to
of
say no matter what.
the sense of self belief is through the roof. I think that's a big part of why they are elite level athletes. I mean, I spent time with Dmitry Klokov, who was a silver medalist in weightlifting. Right, Dmitry was at one point was huge. He was like worshipped in CrossFit. You would never be around somebody with that if you've never been around like that level of athlete. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he was insane. We went in. We had a 45-minute drive into the gym one morning, and he slept the whole way there. And got out when we got there. You know how groggy you are after you sleep. And then he drank a full Coke for breakfast, a Coke, like when a Coke, not a Diet Coke. He drank a
Yeah.
Coke for breakfast. And then he did a couple of warm up sets and did a clean and press with 445 and just said, yeah, that's good. And then dropped the bar. That was insane. He did like the most casual clean and press with 445. It was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. But
It's
if you
crazy.
heard Dimitri talk about himself, he knew he was the shit.
Yeah.
That's the way he talked. He was Russian. And I was like, there was nothing about me that was fitting because I've been around NFL players, I've been around professional fighters, I've been around gold medalists. They all talk that way.
Yeah, you have to. If you don't talk that way, if you don't have that belief within yourself, you're never gonna get that far. People were like, "Oh, now that he lost, I hope it. Oh, did his ego get checked? Now he does." It's like, what do you mean my ego get checked? So I lost the show. So you think now I'm just gonna not stop saying this? That just makes you a fucking failure. That's all. That's all it does.
I remember when Dorian Yates was in his prime, and he talked about the fact that he would open up the magazines and see those guys out in L.A. driving like fancy cars in their sunshine, and he's like, "All you bitches are going to pay. Every one of you are going to pay."
I'm in the snow.
Yeah, it was like he was walking through the snow to go to Temple Gym, and he's like, "Every one of you are going to pay for this." That was his. If you said that now, people would be like, "Oh, dude, why you like that? Why you go? Why you so pressed, bro?" Blah blah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like he no, dude. He was trying to dominate other dudes.
Uh-huh. No homo.
Yeah, no homo. He was trying to dominate other dudes in his selective sport. What's he supposed to? Even the people you think that like project like this outwards humility, like I'm a huge Chiefs fan. Behind the scenes, Patrick Mahomes he's a dog. Like I remember when we beat the Bills in the playoffs last year, they had that clip of him in the locker room. And he's like, he goes, they asked for it and they got what they asked for. Like that, in other words, once you get behind the scenes of how competitive they are, that's how they actually talk.
Yeah, yeah. I think for whatever reason, specifically in this industry, I mean, I'm not that involved in other sports and stuff, but so many people in this industry are just fucking soft pussies. Like they if you talk confidently about yourself or anything, oh, this guy is such a big ego, he needs to relax, blah blah blah. But it's like
What do
you
you,
go over
what do
to
you,
go over to
what do
MMA,
you,
look at how they talk to each other.
bro? Exactly. In MMA, they're like, dude, you're a pussy and your wife's a bitch, and I'm gonna beat the brakes off you. Like the level of the machoism, however you want to describe it, is at the zenith in MMA, right? Like the way that they have to approach it. Go back to the way like when who was it? Daniel Cormier and John Jones were beefing. Like there's some cool stuff, and they legitimately did not like each other. There was that one scene where the camera wasn't rolling, wasn't recording, but it was recording. Like they went to break, and they were steel jawing at each other when they were supposed to be a break. So it's not even like promoting the fight; they hated each other. And John Jones was like, "I'm gonna like beat the living shit out of you. You know that? It's like I'd kill you right now." Like that's how they're talking to each other.
Yeah.
And you're literally just out there saying, "I'm going to be the best. Nobody's going to beat me in this show." Et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, dude, 100% support that. That's the attitude you got to
People
have.
fucking hate Nick Walker because he talks like that. It's crazy.
Why?
He's an egomaniac. It's crazy.
What attitude is he supposed to have? Oh man, I'm just gonna try,
Just
and
be quiet.
I'll just be doing my best. And, maybe maybe I'll win. I don't know, whatever. No, dude, like that's not the attitude you got to have. I will bet you money behind the scenes, because C-Bum comes across as a super nice guy. I'm not saying he's not, but I'll bet you money behind the scenes of some conversations that are unfiltered with like close friends. I'll bet he talks about how Dino could never beat him, how he beat his ass, and how like he could
I
you
mean,
know
I know Chris. I mean, I don't know him that well, but I was around him for over a year when I lived in Florida. I was at the gym with
Mhm.
him all the time. I was at our headquarters. He knows. He knew nobody was ever beating him. He knew, like he was unfazed, like not worried about anything. I'm the best. Like he knows that.
Right, and that. I think there's a combination. I think the people who excel, it's because they excel because they have the genetic traits to excel, but then they also have the attitude to excel, and then
100%.
they continue to stay on top because of the combination of those things. But I think it's perfectly fine for somebody to have what other people think of as an egotistical belief in self, so that they can accomplish things that are difficult. I mean, what else are you supposed to tap into?
It's competitiveness. You have to fucking you have to tap into that. I also think it makes it more entertaining, right? You watch MMA, you see these guys talk. Like it makes bodybuilding, in my opinion, is very boring. Like they sit up there, they don't really say anything. Like I'd be so much more inclined to watch bodybuilding shows if you went to Olympia and they were like, "You're a fucking pussy. I'm going to beat your ass," even though they're not actually doing
Like
that.
if they were
Like
out there,
Phil,
it's like
remember Phil and
like
Kai?
Phil and Kai body was so much more interesting because of all the shit they would talk to each other. Remember the press conference they had, and
Yeah,
then I can't remember how it went. You probably remember this one better, but Kai said
2011,
something.
2012, 2013.
It was like, yes, that one, that
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
yes,
Give me four.
yes, that one,
Give
dude.
me
That
four
was
reasons why
so.
you could.
Give me 4 reasons why why you're gonna beat me. And then he goes, 2000, 2012, 2013, and he goes through the years. Oh, dude, it was so cold. I'm
Yeah,
like, oh my god, like there's no comeback for that.
yeah.
There's no comeback for that. And
And they'd
that's
be
yeah,
pressing each other on stage too. They were fucking
they would get in each other's
rivals.
face. But what's cool is now, like Phil talks about Kai in such a respectful way now. Like he
Yeah,
talks about, he's like Kai is like the thickest, most dense bodybuilder like I've ever seen. So and then now, if you watch, going back to Daniel Cormier and John Jones, the way Daniel Cormier talks about John Jones is like nothing but respect, like
yeah,
as a fighter. But when you're in those moments, for some people, like you just can't be that nice guy. Like you can't be like, oh, I'm everybody's buddy. And honestly, personally said, but like I kind of hate that shit. I think it's soft.
yeah,
Dude, when I played football like for 13 years, and then I coached, so like I have a lot of athletic background. But the guys that I really admired in football were like Greg Lloyd, and were Ray Lewis, and were James Harrison. And it's the guys that were like imposed their will on other grown ass men that were trying to hurt them.
hmm,
Do you think their attitude was, I'm like, you don't think Ray Lewis was like, I'm gonna dominate everybody on this field? Like that's the way he talks. So like, it's very weird to me that the
yeah.
kids don't understand. Like there's this attitude by people who are trying to compete and succeed at a high level that is commensurate with those endeavors. I don't. I'm like, what do you expect out of athletes? What do you expect out of people that are trying to achieve something that's difficult? They need that edge. They need that attitude.
100%. I honestly, like I said, I wish it was more prevalent in bodybuilding. I think it's not like that because a lot of people know how people react and they're like afraid to say these things. But it would make it so much more entertaining, and it just I think it drives the competitiveness more, right? I think that was more prevalent in the '90s and stuff, and you also
Hmm.
saw better bodybuilders. Now everybody's like, I'm buddy. You know, I looked up to this guy for so long. You could have that respect, but it's like you're not there to be friends with everybody. You're not there. It's just my competition. Like this is the
In
best show in
the
the world.
'90s, man, it was like Sean Ray like tried to push everybody's buttons. Like
Yeah,
Sean Ray was like fighting with everybody. I think everybody still considers Sean Ray kind of I think he's got some history or stuff, but there was in the '70s there was like Arnold and Mincer, and that carried over a little bit into the '80s, and then in the '80s Haney started winning, and then but Haney was like so he was a nice person, but if you go watch Haney stuff, like he knew nobody could beat him. Like he talked in the same kind of way. He was respectful, but he's like, none of y'all can stand on stage with me. Like just like there's
yeah.
nothing wrong with that. I don't understand. It's like I didn't even know you caught crap for that. I don't know what kids are saying they're glad to. I see. I don't talk that way. We're like, ooh, I'm glad this person lost, unless it's like politics, like last night. But when it comes to that kind of stuff, oh, or against my team, there's definitely teams in football because I'm a Chiefs fan.
Well, did you watch Generation Iron? Do you remember the first Generation Iron movie? Did you see that?
First one, the,
And
the
that
first one
was
was the one with
Phil and Kai and Ben
yeah.
Pekulski and all of them, and it was very competitive. Like that was it's
Hmm.
by far the best documentary about bodybuilding to ever exist, and it was
Hmm.
because of the nature of what was going on at that point. You know, it really died off in the past decade. Like it's not like that anymore, and I think that really is what drives the competition to be better. It makes it more
I even
entertaining to watch.
remember if anybody thinks Ronnie Coleman didn't have an ego, man, you weren't paying attention. Ronnie, remember when Ronnie was like, he was, who was he making fun of? He's like, you've been talking about how you 300 pounds. He's like, I'm 300 pounds too. We can do this right here. Do you remember that? And go look it up. It's
Like
fantastic.
Gunther was
It
before
was,
Ronnie.
no, I
No,
think it was Gunther.
Gunther. Okay,
Hmm. It was
yeah,
Gunther. He goes,
because like he
Gunther
was
talking
yeah.
about, he's like, Gunther's talking about how he's 300 pounds and whatever. He goes, I'm 300 pounds too. He's like, we can do this right here. And Ronnie, like, he stripped down right there at the presser. So that stuff was way more interesting. Well, now when
Yeah.
everybody's just giving each other circle jerks, I'm like, you don't watch that.
Yeah. It's just it's boring now. But somebody's got to come in and cause some disruption.
Yeah, I
We
mean,
need a McGregor in bodybuilding.
that was the other thing. Like when McGregor was fighting, people either watched because they wanted to see. When McGregor was in his prime, he was so fun to watch, dude. Because before he got off caught in the life of party and money and cocaine or whatever it is he's doing, he's so gone. Um, McGregor was the best in the world, and he talked like it too. And he was so interesting to watch because he was funny. The way he
Mm-hmm.
trash talk was funny as
Shut your
hell.
fucking mouth.
Yeah, just the way that just his whole trash talk. There's that one where he's at the presser and there's like 20 fighters and they're all talking shit to him. He's just cooking all of them.
Who the
It was
fuck is this guy?
yeah, that one. It was that one. Oh my god, that dude was amazing to watch. And then so people either wanted to see him get beat, which is it's fine, it's fighting, or they wanted to see him like continue to stomp people out. But yeah, I don't in bodybuilding, I don't have any problem. I wouldn't show. I guess what I was saying is earlier, I would not show up at a guy's account to be like, "I'm so glad that you lost." I'm just like, if I don't really have anything, like I said, in competitive sports, like it's like football. I'm like, I hate to see certain teams win. I dislike certain teams, but I don't know, man. It's just a very weird thing. I think these kids feel so insecure. I do think, and I'll say this for all the TikTok kids get mad at me or whatever. I think in some ways kids now have it way more difficult. Now, when we talk about they grew up and saw, but I think in some ways it's more difficult because we do live in a social media age where I think they feel like they are in this constant sense of comparison, and I think for guys, this is that we compare like if another guy is bigger or he's like stronger or he's better looking or whatever. I think a lot of these kids they watch some kid blow up and gets like hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, and they want that sense of validation. They want that sense of that people respect me. They want that sense of that I'm important too. And I think in some ways, because when I was growing up, there was no social media. We didn't have that. It was just you had respect amongst your peers in person, and so there was a pecking order or whatever. You could work to earn that respect amongst your peers, whether it was in athletics or whether it was in academia or whatever. No, there was a way that you could get that amongst your peers, and it was celebrated. And I think now kids are in a position where look at all these kids that like get on trend and stuff at like 17 and 18 years old. It's insane.
See, wait. You say that. Was that not a thing when you were in school? Because this is what I've always thought, right? I look at these kids now, and for whatever reason, they all seem like almost deformed and smaller. Like they're not as, I think it's the testosterone thing, or it has something to do with that. Like the kids look way
Naturally,
younger.
we were talking about this. There's definitely something weird. When I was growing up, we had dudes that looked like full grown ass men at like 17 years old. I'm talking about like whatever. And the kids now have this very weird look physiologically, where it's like they
It's
are
like they
under.
don't finish puberty till they're 30 or something.
Yeah, like they're undersized. They can't grow beards. I don't know if it's a hormonal thing, and if everybody's right about that, with all everything to do with the plastics, or whatever. But there's definitely something that seems
Drinking
different.
tap water is making them.
It's kind of like this. I don't know. I remember like years ago. It's kind of like when I was growing up. I always felt like girls when I was growing up, they looked like when I was on my teen, like girls that were in their teens looked like teens, and I remember hitting my 20s and 30s, and then you could be totally. That's how a lot of guys got in trouble because these girls that be like 15 years old didn't look like they were 15 years old. They looked like they were 25.
Mhm.
So I don't know if and people blame that on say, well, there's hormones like in food that we didn't have in certain years, and now it's either there or not, and then like because
There's 100% hormonal differences.
yeah, I feel like that there definitely is because you will see girls now on social media that are like 18 or 19 years old that are their muscular development's kind of crazy. And then they've already got like, they've already got like big boobs and like they're built like full grown ass women. And
Uh-huh.
then on the flip side of that, the dudes look like they're 15 years behind. In other words, like you'll see some dude that's like 16 or 17, and I'm like, bro, have you finished puberty yet? Like it's very weird. It's like there's been this reverse kind of transition where
Yeah.
I feel like that girls hit like this genetic like maturity at a really young age where they're way more jacked. Um, I'm like, how are these girls this jacked at like 17, 18 years old? They'll be like early 20s, and then the dudes will be really really undersized and have this very small soft kind of look. You know what I'm talking about? It's the same look. I see it all the time. And they'll be like, oh, I'm 22, and I'm like, what? I'm like, what? I'm like, how are you 22, man? You literally have the body of like a 15-year-old dude that's not eating.
Hmm.
And they'll be like, I don't know how to grow. And I'm like, I don't think that they necessarily. It's like they don't train hard because I think some of them probably do. I think there could be some hormonal stuff that's going on there because there's definitely some. I think some weird things that I see now that I don't feel like that I saw when I was growing up and going through my teen years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many factors that play into it. There's no way to pinpoint it, but I brought that up because when I always noticed when I looked at you go to the high school weight rooms, you would lift, and they have like the records, and
Yep.
all the records from like multiple schools that I've been in, like the records from like the 80s and 90s would be fucking insane. Like these kids were benching 500 pounds in the 80s like regularly, which I would never see. Right? I had some kids that were just genetic freaks could bench like 4 or 5, but like it was rare, and I think you like really probably rarely ever see that now, but it seemed like in the 80s these kids were fucking powerhouses as if they were
Yeah,
eating anabolic candy.
I had a 4 or 5 bench for the first time at like 19,
Yeah, so I'm
and
saying
I was clearly natty.
were kids not taking gear in high school in the 80s? Was that not because it also was it even banned at that
No,
point? Was it illegal at that point?
when I did the podcast with Kurt Havens and Paul Bartnett like last month or whatever, like I talked about the fact that by the time that I was 18, I was already like 220 something pounds. When I was 4 years prior, when I started lifting, I was 97 pounds. There were people like, that's clearly like a sign Paul was on gear. I was like, dude, I'm in the backwoods of Mississippi. I didn't even know when I knew the steroids as like what they were. There's no source at that time. You don't get a source. Like there's
Hmm.
no source. You couldn't get a source in the backwoods of Mississippi for steroids. Like this is the most absurd thing I ever heard. But once I started training and eating, I just grew. I was going through puberty too, so it's not really a fair comparison. I was a very underweight 14-year-old but then the average after that I looked up. I was like, what's the average 14-year-old weigh? So the average 14-year-old male is like 110 pounds. So I was 13 pounds under, which is about right because all I did was smoke Marlboros and play Ninja Gaiden on Nintendo. So that's all I did at that time. So I was very underweight for my age. But then as soon as I started lifting, I started eating normally, and we can get into that with the whole like main gaining talks going around. But I started eating normally, and then I just put on weight. And then when I got super interested, I just wanted to grow. That's all I thought about. So I was eating and training, and that's all I was doing for those years. And next thing I was like 220 pounds. So I think I probably put on muscle naturally. a little easier than say the average person.
But what
Like,
do you think really is attributing to that huge discrepancy? Do you think it is really just like the testosterone levels in decline, that how those kids were
so
so
I
strong back
think
then?
I think what is it? There was some data that showed that the average 20 something year old guy now has way lower testosterone levels than 60-year-old men had in the 40s or something. I can't remember the exact. You can go look it up though. It's out there. It's a really it's legit data, but it's something like the a 20-year-old has less testosterone in his body, has lower test levels than, like, I think it was like either 40 or 50 or 60-year olds back, like either in the 60s or whatever. So it's really big, like the difference.
Yeah.
Like, I can't remember what the science is exactly, but it's something that would blow you. That doesn't seem like real on paper, but if you go look it up, it's true. So it's
Yeah.
like the
So,
testosterone levels from guys in like their 40s or 50s was like twice as much as.
so essentially, if we took like kids from the 80s versus kids now, it's almost like the kids on the 80s were on gear just naturally compared to them now.
I would say, you know,
Like a little
from
cycle, like a small, like little dose of test. Like they had an advantage.
I mean, dude, it is. It's funny to think back on, because like the guys that I grew up with, like you were saying, in like high school, I knew like dudes that looked like grown ass men.
Yeah, I mean, we were
I
watching one of those like you just go on YouTube. It's like showing like a fucking gas station footage from some guy just recording a gas station in like the '90s, and all these kids just look grown as fuck, or like the kids recording in high school. And then I got kids comments on my TikTok. You look 40. I'm like, no, bro, you look 7 years old. That's
Well, the kids on TikTok think everybody that's old over 22 is old.
uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's also because they look like they're 12.
Yeah, so I'm saying, yeah, their perception is skewed. The new standard is becoming like prepubescent. Like that's the standard. You got to look prepubescent, otherwise you look like you're aging too fast.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. So I feel like that if I have to go, and you have me wanting to go look this up now, because you know how data driven I get about stuff. But
Uh,
I want to go look up and see. I wonder what like the average, if they have any data anywhere on like the average. I think we have something, but like what an 18-year-old test level in, like, say, the 70s or 80 was compared to what they are now. I know that now it's really low now. The
mhm.
average guys is really really low now, but I don't know if I don't know what the like the average guys was or is was in if they have something in teenagers. That's like, as far as like what, I wonder what that would look like. Now you have me interested in that. So I was like, if you take like a 15 to 18-year-old now, and you could get their test levels and what that would look like for guys in like the 70s and 80s that were like 15 to 18.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's definitely like, research showing the decline. I don't know if there's anything specific
There's
like that.
there's there's 100% research showing that it's declined significantly, but I think it would be really really interesting to see like how big of a difference that we're dealing with as far as like teens and shit go now.
It'd be crazy if we could run like a controlled experiment, which this would obviously never happen. If you could take like two kids and just have them live the entirely different lives, like live like basically in the '80s, like all we don't have so much processed food. There's not social media. There's outside playing sports, and see
Mm-hmm.
what their testosterone is like year by year by year till they're 18 versus the kid that is just scrolling on TikTok, is jerking off all day. Like, what is that difference going to be in the long run? And just to see like how all these things actually affect it. But obviously, then there's genetics too, so it'd be hard to calculate. But
Well,
it'd be
you'd have
cool.
to have like identical twins,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
separate them and let them grow up in completely different environments,
yeah. Social experiment.
and
Social.
see if like there was like, because they'd have basically the same DNA, then you put them in different environments. I mean, we do know that that does, from a psychological perspective, that happens, because if you take identical twins and one of them is gay, it's only like about half the time the other one's also gay. Yep.
What?
Mhm.
So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, it means that there's you people have different psychological responses to environment.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because like the belief is like your sexual orientation is geared around nature and nurture. So it's not that you, like, nobody's like born gay or straight, but that it gets cultivated in how you feel as you're going through experiences, and the whole
Mm-hmm.
nature and nurture thing that's going on when you're growing up, and so you end up kind of cultivating you being attracted to men or women or whatever your sexual orientation is. That there's most of the people believe there's no straight gene or gay gene. It's a kind of how you end up orientating sexually is dictated by your experiences and how you perceptualize them growing up, and then that kind of manifests itself in your feelings. So I think
It's
that's
nurture.
the say what.
It's nurture.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty well known, but I'm sure that somebody's going to misquote me or get offended or say that I'm saying something homophobic or whatever, because that's how all these conversations go. Because people misquote you and make up lies about your life.
Yeah. As we have seen
And
recently.
I was going to say, getting back to when that stuff happened with you, one of the things that happened was that people were literally outright making up lies about you.
Yeah, I mean, I've
While you
talked
took,
about it numerous. I literally got a comment about it yesterday. It's fucking crazy, and it's like I really don't let it bother me, but sometimes it's just like, how the fuck is this still a thing? Where people were saying, the whole idea of me, crashing out or fucking having this temper tantrum backstage, which I can't even. So many times we've gone over the fact that this did not happen. It was made up. It was a blatant lie. There was nothing to base it off of. There's been multiple people at the show that have testified to that. My coach, my videographer, everybody that was there, everybody that saw me, like nobody has said that they actually saw this. It was just speculation based off of, Justin Shire
Mhm.
made a story post about somebody potentially acting weird backstage, I guess. And then somehow that got
And
correlated with
so,
me
yep.
because I deleted my social media, I guess. And then these kids made videos about it and they know it's not true. Saw me at the gym, didn't say anything to me, proceeded to spread these lies, which I've never received an apology for. And I still, to this day, like,
They
get
keep doing it.
people who believe this shit and associate me with this thing that never happened.
So one of the ones that got started about me just recently was um, that I've been divorced 3 times, and then
Awesome.
I was like, okay, I think that's difficult to do when I've only been married once ever. And when I actually posted that in my story, and I got multiple DMs from people saying, I'm not trying to troll you, but I actually did think you had been like divorced like 3 times. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
where the hell does this come from?
Shit spreads like wildfire.
Like, I think that's the other thing. So Reddit or TikTok or any of these places, somebody will literally just make something up about you, and then the people who don't like you will totally be like, "Yep, I don't like him, so that has to be true," and then they just spread it everywhere.
Latch onto it. That's it. Like anybody
Somebody
who heard that shit about me, if they didn't already like me, they had some bias, I blocked them or whatever. Like that's all they need to hear. Then that just
And then what
carries.
they'll do, Seb, is they'll add stuff onto it too.
Mm-hmm.
So then, like, I had a couple of DMs from like, not only did I hear you that happened, but that also like you were a wife beater and you like you used to be. I'm like, where the fuck did this come from? Like, my former wife literally drove out 8 hours out here to Nashville just to come out and visit like a couple months ago.
Uh-huh.
Like, it's the stuff that they make up is just literally baseless. I have read some really, really horrible stuff about me on Reddit, and people talking about me and my kids in a way that I mean, when I say total lies, I mean it's kind of like you were talking about. You had the one story where you heard somebody drag you on Reddit for saying you tried to charge them like it was like $800 or whatever.
Yeah, I saw somebody posted something. Oh yeah, he tried to charge me $800 or whatever for coaching. Like that never happened. That's never been. That's not how much I charge. Nobody ever said that to you. Like this is literally just bullshit information for no reason
That's
being
what I mean.
said.
Like I'll go out there, like I've gone out there. I really don't go much anymore, but I'll go out there and end up reading some thread about me, and it will be a bunch of people just making. I mean, just made up stuff that's never happened.
Uh
Like
huh.
I mean, just flat out like lies. Like it'd be like if you and I sat here and said we're going to pick this dude we don't like, and we're going to say that he went to prison and was in prison for like 5 years, and then he like sexually assaulted like a minor or whatever, and none of it ever happened. But somebody will say something, and it'll just spread, and I'm like, well, where does this even come from? So there was this one dickhead, and I don't do the name dropping thing, and I'm not going to drop his name, but if I ever see him, he and I are going to have a conversation. But he literally made up this. I told you about this on the phone, and he literally made up this whole story about some girl that I had supposedly slept with, and it
Yeah.
was during, and he made it up, and he said it happened on a specific time. And how I knew immediately like this was a lie was I was like, okay, during that time, that particular weekend, I was doing a seminar, and I was with my buddy, and we were up until like 1 o'clock in the morning out in the like lobby talking for the 2 nights that we were there. And I had a girlfriend I was super crazy about at the time. The whole thing is just a complete lie. Like,
Mhm.
yeah. So I'm like, that's literally just a made up story. Now I don't know if she actually, maybe it's a girl that actually told him that, and he's just repeating something she said, or maybe he just made it up. But the point was, it was baseless. Like, it was completely either she made it up or he made it up. But even if she made it up, he's off repeating something he doesn't even know to be true, which wasn't. And that's what I mean by this being like a mental disease, a mental disorder, because I would never go repeat some type of baseless bullshit lie from somebody like that
Yeah.
and tell other people so they could run with it. But they feed off that stuff. They just
Uh-huh.
feed off of it. And so like any
Negativity.
yeah, and then so people will be like that. Like the other one is like, and I've been single for a while, really happily single. My life's about as good as it can get right now. But I don't. I've chosen not to date because I think dating anymore is very difficult. I think social media has made dating more difficult. Um, and people think that like, well, clear, that's why all these women have left you. I'm like, I nobody's left me. Like even when I got a divorce, I'm the one that filed.
Hmm.
That's like it's just made up stuff. It's
Yeah.
just made up stuff. And and what they do is they start these rumors. And I was telling you this. I have a friend, Alexis, and Reddit was literally trolling her and bullying and harassing her on her wedding day, like in her DMs and on her various social media platforms, and blowing her up because somebody made up this fake story that her husband cheated on her. And like it literally never happened. And
Yeah.
he, like, in other words, she knew it didn't happen because same situation. She was somewhere with her husband when this whole thing allegedly took place, and she's like, it's a made up story. Like we were literally not even. They were on like vacation. Like it didn't happen. Like when he was supposedly cheating, and she's like, he was literally with me while we were on vacation. Like it just didn't happen. And so like the story didn't even check out. But that didn't stop people from continuing to repeat it.
Yeah. No.
It's crazy. And then people don't understand why you have times where it's like you said, where you get fed up with social media because, like you said, after um, like the show didn't turn out the way that you wanted. Like I'm like, dude, that's okay. That happens sometimes, man. I fully support you having a. I'm gonna whoop everybody's ass going into it, and then if things don't turn out the way that you wanted, it's okay. You come back to the drawing board and reload, get reloaded, and do it again. But I don't think these kids who have ever done anything in their life, I don't think they understand any of those processes. So
Mhm.
their whole thing is, I just am going to sit back and take shots at people while I actually do nothing with my life.
Yeah, they're watching from the sidelines. I mean, you see it in every sport, right? The guys who go fucking insane when they're watching basketball or football or anything, and then the team loses and like they feel like they're on the team and they purse. It's like, what do you shut the
Like
fuck up? Like they
there's
get so
no,
emotional.
there's no we. You weren't in the game, buddy. You were on your couch eating some Cheetos. Like there's no
Yeah,
we. It was them.
yeah,
So I mean, that's the other thing that just after a while, I think does. I don't think people understand does take a toll on you because um, it's kind of weird. It's like you said, lots of days you just go through and you're like, oh God, like you don't care. Like it's like water off a duck's back and you don't care. Like, because people are always talking shit. But
mhm,
then like as you just have times in your life where you have real things going on in your life and it just adds to that. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back kind of analogy. And you're just like, you guys are literally just making up bullshit lies about me, you know. And when it's used this phrase of "get a life," that's how I feel. I'm like, you really don't have anything better to do with your life and shit.
yeah. And the thing about that stuff is, in the scenario that I had, it's like there's nothing I can do to prove this to you because it's just my word and the people that were there against what other people are telling you, and there's no proof of what they're telling you, and there's no proof to show that it didn't happen. So it's like you're just gonna believe what you want to believe. Like there's really nothing else I can do.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, well, if a girl makes up a story about me that never happened, and I mean, all I can say is, well, that didn't happen because I was literally here that weekend doing a seminar with my buddy, and we were literally sitting out in the lobby till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning every night, like just bullshitting. And then I had a girlfriend at the time that I was really really crazy about. So like this whole story is just like some made up bullcrap, but it doesn't stop either her from saying it or from you repeating it.
Yeah.
But and so I've read stuff that is absolutely made up, like about my kids. I mean, literally people talking about my kids. I'm like, you're talking about my kids, like there's things, in my opinion, even amongst, and I show the same respect to the people I quote unquote don't like, and there's plenty of them that have shown the same respect to me. But when you get into the real, like the sewage of the internet, like Reddit, there's no there's no rules. There's no code. So I was talking to the guys that I've beefed with the most over the last couple of years. Milo Wolf and like Pack and all those guys. And Pack and I will actually talk in DMs at times, so we get along quite well. And I told him, I was like, man, no matter how much like we beef over this stuff, one of the things that you guys consistently do is show me like that kind of moral code of respect. I'm like, you don't talk about like my kids or my personal life, or you don't talk about any of that stuff. And he goes, why? He goes, who does that? I'm going, like, what do you mean who does that? I'm like, and he goes, that's so like out of bounds. He goes, I don't know your personal life. And even if I did, I would never talk about it. And I'm like even like he nor Milo, like, or even Mike Israetel. Mike's actually been to my house 1,000 times. I don't think people know that me and Mike were actually really close friends for years and years and years.
Hmm.
But Mike's never taken shots. He knows my kids. Like, he's never taken shots or said anything about my personal life, and I wouldn't with him either. And I've heard stuff about Mike's personal life, and I will even be like, dude, I don't tell me that stuff, because number one, I don't care, and number two, it's just really shitty of you to talk about somebody's personal life like that. So they think like if you are beefing with this person, you want to know stuff about this person's personal life. I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
Like, if we're beefing, I'm going to beef with that person, and it's usually just over exercise science bullshit. At the end of the day, we're not curing cancer.
Hmm.
But then other people like to drum that drama up. They
Hmm.
like to drum that drama up as if like they don't
All
get
this
anything out of
gossip.
it. Yeah, they try to drum that shit up, and I'm like, I just think it's low rent behavior. Like,
Yeah.
it's just absolutely low rent behavior. So
It's like
it's
you'll disagree with somebody about something, it's whatever, and then all of a sudden it turns
it's
into
like
well,
this.
well, like her, she did this, and then I'm like, all right, well, like what are we even talking about now? Like now this is just you showing that you're clearly insecure about this individual to some extent, and it's bothering you so much that you have to go into all these different directions, and it's just a waste of energy for everybody. It's like what are we even talking about here? For what? What is the purpose of this? What is this contributing to?
Yeah, it's like that Nick, the hypertrophy guy or whatever. That he's not actually a hypertrophy guy. He literally the TMZ reporter. He literally just goes out and looks at my content, and it's like Paul Carter said, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, that's find something to do with your life. Like, you, his whole. It was the weirdest thing when somebody finally sent me that dude's account. It was like, I'm like, that it's literally go get some therapy. You are obsessed with me, and it's very unhealthy. It's not a good look. Like,
Yeah.
you cling to everything I say, trying to start drama off something. They're like, Paul Carter thinks you only need to do 4 to 6 sets of muscle. Mike Israel thinks that's really stupid. And then blah blah. I'm like, okay, I think everybody knows that. So does that need content? Just odd. It's just odd.
It's just trying to get views using other people's names
Well,
or whatever.
that's the thing, right? It's like, so what they're doing is grifting.
Yeah.
They're trying to use other people's accounts to grow their account, and I hate that shit too. I
Uh-huh.
think that's like, I'm gonna, when people like consistently do that, when they can't actually create content, so they're just
Yeah.
creating drama content.
Uh-huh.
So it's that's why I don't really stitch people. You ever
Yeah.
notice that people's like, you should do more reactionary? I'm like, I actually hate that stuff for the most part. Not always, like, but I mean, I don't need to. I mean, because I've done a few of them. I did one on Lane Norton where Lane was trying to talk about mechanical tension, and it was so bad. And Lane's got a big reach, and he doesn't need to be talking about that stuff because he doesn't know what he's talking about. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to explain. And I was actually totally respectful to Lane, but I'm like, like this is completely wrong. So you don't
Hmm.
understand what's going on with mechanical tension. So I didn't have any choice there. He left me no choice. I'm like, this is so bad and wrong. I'm like, and I've tried to educate people on this um, for a very long time. And that stuff's hard too, because getting people to have like that paradigm shift and move the needle on something they believe to be true is a very difficult thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they create a sense of identity with their belief system. That's what that is. So they think of muscles torn down and built back bigger. It's, and you tell them it's not. They will just start arguing. It's emotional arguments. When I said this past week, I spent a month going over the data for like when it comes to like growing nutritionally. And I'm like, I cannot find a single bit of legitimate data that says a surplus is doing something for you that that maintenance calories are not.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got a lot of questions about that, which I already addressed, really. But I mean, we've already talked about this. Like this information that you're saying, it's nothing new. It's
Mm-mm.
I think anybody who is,
Okay, before
it's
we go forward, so that we can talk about this topic from like a physiology standpoint, I do feel like this. It's a very weird thing, and I brought this up, and you've actually brought it to my attention yourself. So somebody's like, "It's not an ego thing." It's like I get told this. Anytime I say something, it goes crazy viral.
Mhm.
Is that not? Do you not feel like that's true? It's like as soon as I say, because when I said Chris and I did the research on looking at atrophy rates versus myofibril protein synthesis rates versus recovery rates, and we sat down for like a long time. It was weeks and weeks and weeks of data. I was like, for me personally, I'm gonna get away from doing bro splits and I'm gonna do an upper lower split. And after that, upper lower splits became something people were talking about all the time.
Yeah, I know.
You even sent he's like, you motherfucker, you sent me a DM. You're
I
like,
get,
you're
I
like,
get.
you started this. And I'm like, dude, all I said was here we did the data. And I think actually they even misconstrued that because I said technically it's a full body split is definitely going to be the most effective. And then I said, but I hate full body split. So to me, the next probably best effective is like an upper lower. And again, this is I don't ever take credit. I didn't create upper lower splits. Clearly, I didn't. Nobody created like full body upper lower splits have been around for 1,000,000,000, 11 billion years. So I didn't take any credit. I just said to me, if I'm looking at the data the way that I look at it, the two splits that are probably going to be the most effective if you're getting very granular with this stuff is a full body or upper lower. And I was like, so I don't like full body, so I'm doing upper lower. It was a week later that kids made it was the amount of upper lower like content that got made was
Mhm.
insane. It was
Mhm.
insane.
The amount of fucking questions I got about it and still
Yeah.
get now. Oh my god. Do you uh do you still think the bro split's a good split? Did you know with upper bro, what do you talk why people think because I know you that anytime you say something that like my entire system is going to change just based off of that, like because you said 4 to 8 reps, I'm never going to go over 8 reps now. It's like
Well,
no,
people
I
even
understand what you're saying, but it doesn't dictate exactly how I'm going to do everything now.
well, they do this too. There's never any actual nuanced discussion.
Yeah.
So they'll say, "You said anything over 8 reps is worthless." I'm like, "No, I didn't." And I just is so I'm like, I didn't say. Where did I say worthless? Because
Hmm.
then if I post a video of my training and I do like 9 reps or I get 10 reps, they'll be like, "Didn't you say nothing over 8 reps?" I'm like, true, but I was actually having a good day that day, so I wasn't just going to stop at 8. If I knew 9 or 10 was there, and I'm training at a specific RR or to failure or whatever, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the reps. So it's the reason why I give just like here's your guideline. I'm like kind of want to work in the 4 to 8 rep range, and even I posted yesterday. It's like I've been playing around with sets of three, had like two RIR, and then the back offset, which I
Fuck,
really,
fuck you. Not
huh?
fuck you. Now kids are gonna take this now. 2 3 reps. 2 3 reps. That's what's gonna come from this now.
Um, and you could if you could play around with it becomes if you were people like well, what about like why not do like singles? I'm like because it gets very inefficient at some point. So still have to get enough stimulating repetitions, within your workout for it to be effective. But what I do is just I'm trying to play with like different ways to see how progressive overload occurs. So if I do 3 reps and I'm at like 2 RIR, then over the next couple of weeks, what I do is I work that 3 reps up to something where I'm at 5 or 6. You know what I mean? And I do it slowly. So I'm adding a rep maybe every second workout. So I go 3 reps at 2 RIR, and then I'm allowing the adaptations to occur. And then I go to say 4 reps and then that 4 reps is now like 4 reps at maybe 2 RIR, which means progressive overload still occurred, but I'm still not training at failure. And then over the course of weeks, I start pushing up against failure, like 6 reps, whatever, 6 or 7 reps. I think trained by JP. Jordan Peters, he had a kind of similar method a few years ago where he would do doubles and triples. But I think he was, and then he would do his back offs. So it's not, this is nothing like new, but you play around with different things to see how you like them and then see what the outcomes are. Um, and the reason why I'd say stuff like I think the 4 to 8 rep range is probably going to be the most effective is because um, if you're going down the hierarchy of things that are going to create the greatest amount of fatigue, longer muscle length stuff is going to be the most. Higher repetition sets going to be after that, and then after that, training to failure, and then the last one's volume. And so people won't get that because all of those things need nuanced discussions. Somebody's going to make content on that. Said, watch. Somebody's going to make content on that. What I just said, somebody will start making it, and then they won't. Number one, they won't credit me, but then they also, which is what you were getting at right there, they don't know the nuances.
Yeah, yeah, no.
So
And
when
they take
there's
everything. It's to the. They take everything to the extreme. I can't do intensifiers now. I have to do upper lower. I can't do more than 8 reps. Like there's no. And then if you go outside of that, it's like, oh well, you're training ineffectively. That's it's not true whatsoever. I mean, I remember when you had the bro split too. We talked about this too about the whole. If people think, oh, now upper lower is superior just because of the fact that you get you have that more you have more frequency.
frequency,
You can elevate, keep the photosynthesis elevated more consistently, whatever. But we also talked about what you're doing in burst split. If you're programming it effectively, you still get secondary stimulus from other movements where you're not going a whole week where the muscle is just not getting hit, right? You do.
depending on how your bro split is set up, you can offset some of that atrophy. Now, I do get irritated when people try to act like atrophy is not happening because we have so much data to show that atrophy absolutely does happen. We have detraining studies where they were training for all of the mass they spent 90 days building is half of it's gone in 10 days.
Mhm.
Like that's you can't get around the fact atrophy happens at a very fast rate. It does go. There's no reason for your body to maintain metabolically expensive tissue when it just wants to keep you alive. So I do get irritated when people will be like, "Well, atrophy doesn't happen that fast." I'm like, "Yes, it does." What do you think? Once myofibrillar protein synthesis for those fibers at the top end of the high threshold motor unit pool, once myofibrillar protein synthesis is back to zero, do you think they just hang out and stay there for no reason? No, they atrophy. They
Yeah,
atrophy.
but I would think that obviously, I mean, just speaking from experience, there's obviously nuance to that, right? That you have this whole idea of what point is that person at? What do they recently just go through in terms of growth, right? Because obviously, the longer you stay at a weight, that becomes closer to your new homeostasis. So if you sat at 200 pounds of muscle for 2 years and really didn't grow that much, and then you just stop training for 2 weeks, are you just gonna atrophy a bunch
Yeah.
compared to if you
Yes.
just put that muscle on? If
Yeah.
you just
The set point thing is not it's not a real thing. So you're if you in fact the larger guys are gonna they're gonna lose tissue at a much faster rate.
No, no, of course, because it's more metabolically expensive. They had it's
The
excessive
well,
amount.
they have more fibers that they've been able to activate because they don't have the motor unit recruitment deficits that say a noob has, right? So those fibers at the top of the high threshold motor unit pool, the only time they ever experience tension is during training.
Hmm.
So once myofibril protein synthesis drops back down to zero, they start those fibers start atrophying. Now it comes back to the rate of atrophy, but if you take whether if it's there's definitely some rates that change whether you're going from like immobilized or you're bedridden to that you just stop weight training but you're able to stay active. So what it appears in the data is that the type 2 fibers they go pretty quickly. So in the data the stretch mediated gains go like almost immediately. Like we've got so much data on that that's not even like debatable. So the longitudinal hypertrophy that happens to sarcomeres in a series that happen from like stretch and eccentric contractions, those are gone in like a week,
Hmm.
like just gone. Like
Yeah.
they go away really quickly. They come on really quickly and they go really away really quickly. Now the actual like physiological cross section area what happens from myofibrils and parallel the type 2 fibers of those go pretty fast too, but not quite as fast as the myofibrils. Now, what appears to happen is that if you are still just active, you're not bedridden or you don't have like an immobilized limb or something, that your type 1 fibers stay for a little bit longer. And that makes sense because they probably get some minor degrees of tension throughout the week just by staying active, right? So but the type 2 fibers go really fast. So I do think people believe that they believe that for whatever reason, I'm like, you'd have to give me a physiological reason why your body would hang on to fibers that are the most metabolically expensive to maintain that you're not providing any stimulus to. So they don't, they just go. So it's now, like I said, the rate always isn't, um,
But you're
it's
saying that there's no set point, right? And what I'm
not,
saying here is right now. So you say I haven't trained, which I barely trained this whole year, right? I had surgery and everything. You know, I cannot do anything for months. It's really hard for me to get past like 180 pounds of just doing nothing, right? And obviously, like I lose size, but then 5 years ago, I could have got down to, if the same thing happened, I would be down to 160, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
do you know what I'm saying? I don't.
But you're still, that's what I'm getting at. If you have some degree of activity level, you will maintain your type 1 fibers can get larger. People think they're like type 1 fibers can get significantly large, and you can maintain type 1 fibers for quite a while as long as you're somewhat active. I mean, you're still doing some training, aren't you?
Yeah.
It doesn't take, it takes so little to maintain. Like, I don't think people realize how little it takes to grow or maintain. You can grow off one set twice a week.
Hmm.
Like literally, you one set twice a week has. We have quite a few studies that show that'll cause growth. And then if you're doing 3 sets once a week, just 3 sets once a week will keep your gains. So it takes, if you're doing any training at all, like you'll keep some stuff, or you'll dramatically slow down the rate of atrophy if you're doing like really almost any training at all. So even if you're just going in, because like you sent me the one thing where you were kind of working on some, we're talking about what's going on with like your scapula and stuff. Even if you're going in that day and getting um, some isometric contractions, doing some like rehab work or prehab, you'll maintain stuff. So
Hmm.
there was a study that came out that looked at bodybuilding posing, right? Like cause growth. Like you can get growth out of flexing, which
Hmm.
makes sense. It's an isometric contraction. It's the same mechanisms that are going on in isometric contractions. It's mechanical tension, which is the higher degree of metabolite accumulation that happens with them. So you can get growth or maintain growth. Really, if you were going in 7, you're training like twice a week and just you're doing some stuff. I think you had up in your story the other day was you were doing some like floor presses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it just takes a little to maintain. So like almost everything. So like that's why when guys get freaked out about about losing, when I'm talking about losing size, I'm saying if you're going too long without training, you're definitely not going to be maximizing out your gains for sure. Um, and I do think if you're just hitting, and I brought this up even when I talked about it, the reason why that bro splits can offset that is because depending on how you set your bro split up, you might not have significant periods where some of those muscles are just not experiencing, especially in the torso. There's so much overlap between
Yeah.
stuff that's going on. If you do a sagittal plane pull, the long head of the triceps is going to get some work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you're doing a pull like this, or even like a frontal plane pull, like the triceps, the long head gets some work. Like it
Yeah.
crosses the shoulder, it can do shoulder extension and some degree of shoulder adduction.
Yeah.
So if you do a press, you don't get any long head, but you still get the chest and the shoulders and the triceps. Like they're all getting some stimulus there. The kids also don't understand programming at all. At
No,
all.
they just think
They
a bro
don't
split is just
understand
just fucking
so it's like a press is just a chest press, like
no.
it's just chest, and then if you're doing a chest press, you're only hitting like sternal. I'm like, well, actually, all divisions of the pecs can do horizontal adduction, so the whole chest gets hit in a press. It's like the when we talk about biasing, it's like it's the kind of the magnitude of something either has a little bit more or a little bit less, and they don't understand these. So they're like, why don't you have an exercise for this or that? Because if you can set up a full body split doing 5 exercises in a session, you could. If you did upper body push and upper body pull, and you did one exercise, you could do an exercise like if you did a deep leg press, you're getting quads, you're getting glutes, you're getting adductors, right? So all of those get some stimulus.
Uh-huh.
And then if you add in, so that's what is that? One, two, three. If you did, I mean, that covers a lot. If you want to make sure you're covered, the only things you actually really need to think about the hitting is the
Arms.
is the really kind of arms, and then the rectum and hamstrings,
Hmm.
because you can't, any of those two joint muscles potentially suffer from antagonist inhibition. So if you have a antagonist joint torque that's created, like hamstrings won't grow in squats or leg presses. Same for rec fem, because there's an antagonist joint torque that's created in those motions, so they don't grow from that. And triceps long head doesn't grow from pressing movements. So you just have to think about some of those biarticulate muscles that don't get any direct stimulus. But you can create a full body. But even then, it doesn't mean you have to hit it every workout. So you could do, if you did something for the triceps long head on Wednesday, and then, or say Monday, you may not have to do something for it until like Friday. Or if
Hmm.
you could do leg extensions. You could have a workout where you just do leg extensions as part of the full body plan. That's all of the quads. It's the rec fem and all the vast eye muscles. So, like, you over your full body split, you could have, let's say, if you had four that you ran over, like, let's say you're training 3 days a week, but you had four workouts, that you rotated through, you could split that out and really hit your full body for the most part. But the kids always are like, why don't you have? I had a dude in my groups one time, and he was like, you don't have an exercise for the brachialis. I'm like, get the fuck out of
All right,
here.
hold on. Give me, give me 1 minute because I wanna come back to that point.
Okay.
All right. So speaking of the brachialis, you already, you already know what I'm gonna fucking ask you.
Yeah, I know what you're gonna go. Yeah.
I covered this. You covered this. He still is saying the same thing, and it just kind of amazes me. So maybe you want to break this down, but
Well,
I really
Kristen, I just say anybody who's still running around saying the brachioradialis is the prime mover in hammer curl is completely incorrect. Chris and I are going to go over this Saturday. So um, if he wants to try to refute Chris, that's fine. Um, but basically, one of the things that's gotten mixed up by a lot of people trying to grift off either my content or Chris's content is they don't, like you talked about earlier, they don't understand the nuances. So the I actually found some data that I sent to Chris that helps kind of further, which I'm going to talk about here for a second, because people will be like, Paul is just Chris's mouthpiece. They don't understand. We work together behind the scenes. I send him a ton of data that helps continue to flesh out the model. Chris created the model to start with, but I have continued, like in our work together, to help flesh out the model with him. In fact, just the other day, I found a study that shows there is nerve innervation that causes inhibition of the biceps to be able to be involved in elbow flexion, depending on forearm position, which helps to fill out the neuromechanical matching thing, because we do know from a neuromechanical matching standpoint, as you change joint angles, any of the muscles that cross that joint have varying degrees of activation based on their mechanical leverage, right? Now, there's other factors in with that. Like if you have synergist that can contribute to a joint function, we have varying size differences in those synergists. So that's going to basically mean, if you're, here's the one, for example, um, like years ago, people talked about, and I was part of this because I was involved with dumbasses. But when the whole Terry's major pull down thing was going around, technically, the Terry's major has better leverage than the lats throughout, like sagittal plane and frontal plane. To be somewhat fair, the idea was that because it has better leverage, you're like, oh, this is like more like this is Terry's major. Well, there's problems with that, because the teres major is about a third the size of the lat, and then anytime you get a muscle that crosses a joint that can contribute to that, what will happen is, if it's a smaller muscle, it just gets maxed out immediately. That should
Mhm.
make sense from an efficiency standpoint. The body goes, I don't need to exert a lot of. You're exerting this degree of force, so I need to create a signal that's congruent with that size, so that way you can create activation. That's how all of that works.
Mhm.
So if a muscle is relatively, the size matters. So that's what she said. So the size matters. So if you look at like the Terrys, the idea then when I was trying to help, the guys out at N1, they were doing their charlatan biomechanics stuff, is that you could base it around if you were trying to make a case of leverage and say the Terry's major has really, really fantastic leverage all throughout. Like, but it's a small muscle; it's assisting the lats. So when you think of it in terms of like efficiency, um, we have small muscles that can contribute to a joint flexion that work with that has synergists in there. So they're all contributing to this joint flexion. What happens from a motor unit recruitment standpoint is the smaller muscles will get maxed out very quickly, and then as you need to apply higher, more effort to continue doing repetitions, that's when you'll see higher degrees of activation happen with the larger muscles. So they're prime because they're the ones that can produce the most force.
Yeah.
And so it's like a combination of what are all the synergy, what are all the leverage synergists that we have going on here.
Mhm.
Ever since the election, dude, I don't know. Do you get a million spam calls a day now? And then like,
I have it on Do Not Disturb.
okay, so um, so you have to look at a combination of things. The synergists that cross that joint, they can all perform a specific action. Then you have to look at their relative size.
Hmm.
So, like that's how we determine stuff. Like the rhomboids are relatively small comparative to the traps, for example. So the rhomboids will get maxed out in a row pretty quick, and then when you got to really apply a high degree of effort, you'll get more trap activation rep to rep to rep as your degree of effort increases. That's how motor unit recruitment works. So as you go from a neutral, like forearm position, and as you start to supinate, there's nerve innervations in there that will increase, or let's say decrease inhibition effects of the biceps. So the biceps can contribute more to that joint function.
Yes.
You with me? You
Yeah.
following?
Yeah.
Okay. So then as you go to pronation, there's a higher degree of inhibition that happens due to those nerve innervations. So they decrease the ability of the biceps to be involved in that joint action, right?
Hmm.
All of that ties in perfectly with what we see or what was even hypothesized with neuromechanical matching, in that the mapping of how everything works is in the spine.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
really beautiful, right? So um, if you look, if you just look at leverages and you look at some leverage chart, which is what people do, they take Chris's infographics and then they try to create data off of that, not understanding a larger picture.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what he did. And this is what I was saying is that he was basing it all off of just moment arm data and ignoring everything else and saying the brachioradialis is the prime mover, which is just insane, as if the brachioradialis would ever be able to produce as much force as the biceps. And I said in my video, let me know what you think about this. I said that the biceps are the strongest elbow flexor, and I said that because of their relative size and their ability to produce the force. If you look it up, people were saying, "Oh, the brachialis is actually the strongest elbow flexor," but that's just because the brachialis' main action is just flexion, right? The biceps can do flexion and
Supination
yeah,
and
so
shoulder
they
flexion.
they have more action. So relative to that, I guess it's not defined as the strongest elbow flexor, but it still produces the most force out of everything in supination and in a neutral grip for elbow
So
flexion.
So we already have, and he completely misinterpreted a bunch of other data to do with like longitudinal hypertrophy. But we have some really, really nice data. Like I said, looking at both nerve innervation stuff that causes inhibition of the biceps, depending on forearm position. And then there was another study that was tied in with that one that was really well done. It was a fine wire EMG study,
Mhm.
really, really well done. So people are always shitting on EMG because they do not understand how EMG works, and then they will end up repeating that study by Andrew Gutowski where he says you can't predict longitudinal hypertrophy studies off of using EMG. They never read that review. Nobody ever read that review. What Andrew goes on to say in there, or what I perceive him as saying, I'd love to have him on the podcast. He's a brilliant dude. Is that if you're taking exercises that were done in one study and trying and comparing them to exercises done in another study, that you can't, there's a multitude of methodology issues with doing that. So if you establish like maximal voluntary isometric contractions to create kind of like, oh, am I getting, so here's where I'm getting, like I'm basing it off of this. This is 100% of what I'm getting. And so if you have another exercise you do that shows like 125%, it means that exercise is better. So from study to study, you can end up setting it up so that you're using a different baseline of maximal voluntary isometric contraction, right? So you can't take EMG studies from this one study and say this is a better exercise than this exercise. And that's what he's saying is you can't use varying studies to create like a tier list of exercises. And here's the thing, I think what's funny is I want to say that potentially the need for that review happened because Jeff Nippert forever was going around making YouTube videos. I don't know if you remember this, where he'd be like, this study showed there was more EMG for this exercise than this exercise. And then he was basing like tiers off of EMG studies, which I don't think is a good idea. I don't think you can do that.
No.
But within study design, EMG is valuable and is a good tool if you understand how it works and if you understand the limitations.
Well, this all stems back to people just trying to regurgitate literature that they don't actually understand how, and they don't know what they're reading. People
They
read
don't
something
ever
on
understand.
paper and they don't even know what that means. They just take it at face value and say, okay, well, this showed that the bicep activation is this in this study, so it's a great bicep exercise. It's it's you can't just say that.
It's there's generally EMG is better used in my opinion when we're doing fixed joint angles, and when then we fix everything at specific joint angles through the range of motion. So we get kind of a rather than just doing a whole motion and looking at EMG and saying we're seeing EMG here or there or whatever. If we're doing a fixed joint angle and then you do a strong isometric contraction and then you change the joint angle and do a isometric contraction, and then you can contrast what's going on at those different degrees of range of motion through different joint angles, right? That gives us some pretty good insight. So this study did that. And they used fine wire EMG, so it's an intrusive one where they actually put like fine wires into the muscle. So it reduces that stuff like crosstalk, because you can have crosstalk that can happen in EMG studies where you use surface level EMG, where you just slap the EMG on, but something could be showing up from another muscle
Mm-hmm.
that will show up in the EMG reading, but it's what's called crosstalk. So you could be like, okay, well, I'm doing this tricep exercise and it shows so much activation, but you might be getting crosstalk from one of the other tricep heads, right? So you could be like, oh, well, I've got it on the long head, but it could be close enough to the lateral head to where the lateral head activation is kind of bleeding into what's happening at the long head reading. So you have crosstalk stuff that can happen. So you have to understand like where you're putting the sensors at, so what they're showing. But EMG is a good tool, especially if you get somebody who knows what they're doing. But these guys did fine wire. It was a really, really good study. And when they showed exactly what I said. That's not me cherry picking data. I had to go find it. It showed what I said is that the first off, number one, the relative size of the biceps brachii and the brachialis are very similar. They're almost the same size.
Mm-hmm.
And then the brachioradialis is quite small. It's like less than half the size. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're in a pronated, like a fully pronated, like so as we were talking about, if you go from supinated, the biceps are highly active, and
Mm-hmm.
then as you start to pronate, they lose. And I think I sent you two studies to show this. Like so, they were done at different times, and they both show the same thing. I have three or four now. As you get to neutral, you're going to have basically it looks like the activation in the one. I have to dig it back up, but the activation in like neutral between the biceps and the brachialis are relatively similar. The brachioradialis is really not is doing a whole lot.
Yeah, but still in neutral in a hammer curl position, the biceps brachii still has the
It,
ability to
it,
produce the
it,
most force.
the way that I would just define it is a hammer curl is like a good elbow flexor exercise, right? Like you don't. I think trying to get super granular with that stuff. So if I'm saying a supinated curl is more biceps brachii because of that supinated position, but then you get to a neutral position, you're probably getting you reduce the output that the biceps brachii can
Yeah,
contribute, which so relatively speaking the brachialis becomes more involved, relatively
yeah,
speaking, right? So that becomes more involved. So in the supinated position, you have, it's not until you get above 90 degrees, really, that the brachioradialis becomes the most involved because the leverage for the biceps really drops off heavily above that standpoint. So if
yeah.
you're doing a hammer curl, and like the resistance profile is like resistance is peak, or forces, joint torque is peak at 90 degrees of elbow flexion, it's the biceps still heavily involved there. It still has good leverage there. It doesn't. You don't have to get to the biceps having peak leverage, and then you're just looking at peak leverage. You're just kind of looking at contributions that are going on, and then what are the size of those muscles. So a muscle can be really small and have fantastic leverage, but it can't be prime over something that's got maybe less leverage but it's really freaking large.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
doesn't that that's not how neuromechanical matching works. Neuromechanical matching takes all that stuff into account, so you can't just look at a leverage chart and go, this is the prime mover.
yeah.
I'm like, well, how big is that muscle?
Yeah, how big is the muscle? And I mean, even disregarding that, because this is another thing that just doesn't make sense to me. The prime mover of an exercise is the exercise that it's what is primarily responsible for moving the weight throughout the majority range of motion, right? And his idea was that since peak tension is at 90 degrees, and that's where brachioradialis has the best leverage, that it's now a brachioradialis prime mover movement. But like, what is doing from this to this, and then this is 90 degrees, like this little
Well,
fucking range of motion.
one of the things people who think they understand, I know where you're going at with this, is a pet peeve of mine too. There's still a range of motion with load in it in the other part. Okay, so
It's a majority range of motion.
as you go from like, yes, when you're at the bottom, when you're just holding onto a dumbbell, and it's there's no joint torque that's created. There's no external torque that's been created because your arm's directly down and then the waist directly down. But as soon as you move it, you can literally do mathematics on it. There's torque created at that point, right?
Yeah,
So as you bring the arm up, yes, torque is going to peak at 90, but then it starts dropping off as you get above that as well, right? Because the
yeah.
external moment arm shortens. So like you're kind of looking at a range of where you're dealing with the greatest amount of torque. Like where's the greatest amount of torque occurring? So it's not like there's no tension. As soon as you flex the elbow, there's torque.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you flex the elbow, there's torque. So as you're saying, it's a good way to look at it. I agree with you. You're saying throughout this range of motion, I'm looking at a couple of things. I'm looking at where's the peak torque. So what's going to be doing the most work there, and then if whatever's going to be doing the most work, is it a large muscle, small muscle? Is it sharing that joint action with other muscles, synergistic muscles, so on and so on? Just looking at a internal moment arm chart and going like, of course, everybody takes that stuff from me and Chris, but like, yes, you want to look at the resistance profile and look at what's doing it the most work there, but then you have to look at other relative factors. For example, I call like the hammer strength plate loaded machines. They're clearly a triceps exercise, but it doesn't mean the chest is doing nothing. It still has to produce force.
Yeah.
If you tore your pec, you couldn't go, and I have a torn pec. So I like there's no point in me trying to train chest like the way that a normal person would, because I have a torn pec and I've spent 10 years, so I've never gotten it reattached. So I'm like, well, for somebody like me, I could choose some of those hammer strength machines because there's not as much load in the pecs, right? I can do a close grip on those, and the pecs get some challenge, but I would rather use something maybe a little more triceps dominant, because there's no point in me trying to overload like my chest when I have half a pec on one side.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at the resistance profile like a hammer strength, then yeah, I consider it a tricep exercise because it's way hard at lockout and it's really not that hard at the start, right?
It's almost like a floor press in a sense.
In a sense. So it's well, no, I mean you're still dropping off. It'd be like a banded floor press,
Yeah.
like anything like that. But yeah, that's a good, like you don't have a whole lot going at the bottom. And you should know this too. Like if you do a hammer strength chest press and you do the first half range of motion, you can put way more load on.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep it like the half reps, and I've told people this too, because then they get, they take everything black and white. I'm like, well, if you cut the lockout portion of a hammer strength press off, you can make it a good chest press exercise. Just keep it to like what bodybuilders would call those constant tension reps, because then you don't make the triceps the limiter. You're
Mm-hmm.
having to lock out every repetition against it does have a really crazy ascending resistance profile, so it's pretty hard at the top.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to use application always matters. If you're trying to find a triceps press, it's a good choice. But if you want to use something for chest, you can use it too. Just change your range of motion. So
Yeah.
look, right. So that comes back to kind of what we're talking about there. You have to understand everything contextually. So if you're going to do a hammer strength press, just cut the range of motion, and then you can put more load on. So now, right, like we increase the torque because we're putting more load on, right? So to load the pecs, but then like the torque goes through the roof if you're trying to lock it out. So I was like, okay, I'm not trying to create a failure point at lockout by the triceps. But if you're doing a hammer curl like that, you're looking at, we don't just, that's what I was saying, like a hammer strength, you'd still be getting pecs in the first part, clearly. But if you're doing a hammer curl is going to be a biceps and a brachialis exercise.
Yeah, yeah. But it's just again because even with the hamstring press, though, like you still have motion occurring up here, right? Where like the range of motion at that 90 degrees is little to none in a hammer curl. Like it's not like it gains this leverage here and it's doing a bunch of work. It has maximum leverage here. Then
Well, I
drops it
think you
off.
actually you hit on it there. It's like something you're getting at there that I think people really need to understand is like what's going on through the whole range of motion.
Yeah,
What's going on through the whole range of motion? So if I'm initially starting the curl like from 0 to 90, it's biceps and brachialis.
yeah,
And now if I get above 90, the biceps doesn't do as much. It loses a lot of leverage and then break. But now you're only talking from 90 to 100, 10, 20, 30, 40 degrees of range of motion, which is not that much.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm contrasting a 90 degrees of range of motion to 40 degrees of range of motion, right?
yeah.
So
Exactly.
where am I doing the most work?
Exactly. And then even although say there's not that much tension volume, you do it on a cable now. You do it. You change the
Well,
setup.
because people don't actually understand resistance profiles. I'm like, if you're on a cable, I'm like, I can completely change the resistance profile, do
Yeah.
whatever I want to, all depending on. Remember when I was like, when everybody had meltdowns, and I'm like, you don't need to lean onto the leaning tower a piece of cable lateral raise because you just changed the cable height and look where peak tensions occur. People were so mad. I'm like, I try to help you. I'm like, if you lean, all you're not doing anything with the lead. You just
Mhm.
look at the cable and see where's the cable perpendicular to the shoulder joint in the range of motion. So
Mhm.
if you want the same effect, stand up and just set the cable like whatever height that you're getting that. It's the same thing happening. You can't mess with the physics of that. That's the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people were so mad. They were like, "Well, it's you get more activation." I'm like, "You don't know what that means." I'm like, "You don't know what that means." So I mean, you could do if you're using a cable for any kind of curl, right? Like you can change if the cable is most perpendicular to the elbow joint at the top. Sure, I'm going to say yeah, that'll be more brachioradialis, right? Because that's
Mhm.
where the biceps are really going to drop off, and there's not much left up there. You can have brachioradialis with the brachialis.
Mhm.
So you just have to look at like how what's it's, you can't take one thing in isolation and say make statements like that. You have to look at a lot of things.
Yeah. So essentially, I think we've established that it's a bullshit and it is a biceps brachialis
I just
exercise.
consider like a hammer curl to me is just like an elbow flexor exercise, right? Like
Yeah.
that's why I think it's a good one to keep because it's just an overall solid one to use. It's easy on the joint. Some people can't fully supinate. I've talked to people about that, right? And they're like, "Well, can I grow my biceps doing hammer curls?" I'm like, "Why wouldn't you be able to?"
But you see, these kids are actually retarded because I saw this in a comment too, where he was like, the kid was like, "Yeah, well, hammer curls are vaulted. They're essentially useless because it just trains all the elbow flexors and doesn't really bias anything." It's like, what the? So we shouldn't do any
So
fucking
so so
any
if you
compound
start so if you
movements at
started
all.
off so if you started off doing hammer curls and you could do hammer curls for the 20-pound dumbbells for like 6 reps and then you worked up to doing 80s for 6 reps over a few years, what grew? You just got these tiny little biceps and this huge brachioradialis. Is that what? It's like kids forever were worried about. Like you notice I don't ever talk about this shit anymore, but like what's the best exercise for lower lats? I'm like, dude, you do not need lower lat exercise.
No,
Okay.
no,
You know what you can train your lats with? A frontal plane pull and a sagittal plane pull. That's what
yeah,
you got.
yeah,
That's what you got, Seb. That's what you have.
yeah,
You can train them with those two motions. You know how much of the lat gets hit with those? All of it.
yeah, all of it. That's all you need.
If you do a pull down this way and you do one this way, that's lat. All you can do for lats. It's like calves. Do you know there's really only one thing you can do for your calves?
Yeah,
There's one thing.
a straight leg
A
press.
straight-legged calf raise. That's it. You have no other options.
Uh huh.
You have nothing else to do.
Well, you do the tibia raise.
You can do that, but that's I'm talking about the
Yeah.
the triceps surae, right? Like the actual
Yeah.
gastroc and the soleus, right? So the two heads of the gastroc and the soleus. So you can only do one exercise. That's
Mhm.
it. Sometimes you think about the lats. That's a good point. You can do two exercises for lats, two or two motions. You're
Mhm.
always dealing with two motions. That's it
Mhm.
for the whole lat,
Yeah.
right? You think about
Yeah.
the like the glutes. Like, do you know, like, despite the fact that you have two divisions of the glute max, and then you have glute medius, glute minimus, and you have actually subdivisions within all of those, there's only a few things you can do.
Yeah.
You can do hip extension for the glute max. You can do some external rotation loading, and they can do a little bit of abduction. They're not great at it. But for like the glute medius, you can only do really abduct. You could do internal and external rotation to bias the anterior and posterior fibers. But the point is, at the end of the day, you can just do some abduction, and that's all you can do. So if you just look at like what's the prime motion that's going on here with this muscle, do I load that? So if you do a hammer curl, what are you doing? You're doing elbow flexion. Now, if you wanted more biceps, say your biceps suck, you would opt to choose a supinated version to get more activation out of those, right?
Yep.
And I actually know some other tricks. I'll tell you on the side. I don't like to reveal everything. There are some tricks with curls you can do to get some extra biceps growth.
Some tricks you could do to get some extra bicep growth.
Yep.
I wonder if I could. You'd
I,
have to give
I'll
me
tell
hints
you.
when you
I'll
say.
tell you. I'll tell you on the side. No, I'm not even going to hint because you know the kids will steal it. Nobody will credit me and talk shit on me as they stealing my stuff. But I'll tell you. I'll tell you on the side. But for the most part, you don't like. There's only so much you can do. Like, how many times have you seen people talk about lateral raises? That what's the best height for the cable on lateral raise? I'm like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
The delts has seven different subdivisions. So my thing is, I tell people, because people they can't ever make up their mind. They're like, you change your mind, or like you're dogmatic. I'm like, those things can't coexist. If you're dogmatic, it means you don't change your mind.
Hmm.
So I'm like, if somebody presents me with data, I'll move my needle. I'm like, oh, this is really good, and this actually gives me more insight than something I previously did. That's how we should be working. So they'll ask like, what's the best cable height for a lateral? I'm like, well, you're doing abduction for the frontal plane, right? So if you have different subdivisions in the delt, what I would tell people is over time, just use different exercises and different resistance profiles, because maybe you have some fibers that work a little bit harder when you're down closer to the body, and then maybe when you're at the top, you have some fibers that work a little bit harder. So if you just use different resistance profiles over time, that's just the best option. So if you're like like the stretch call would be like you have to do your lateral raises with like the cable set to wrist height. I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah. No, there's no best thing. It's just you need to have variations in your
You
rotation.
can do like my favorite forever was banded laterals, and if you haven't done banded laterals, they're so good because you can really push hard as the peak forces start to happen. They'll be like, well, what's the difference in using that with a dumbbell? And that tells me somebody's never done the banded laterals, because when you get to a point with the dumbbell, like the moment arm is so far away from you, that's just where it goes. Like you're not lifting them any higher. With a band, you can kind of push into that. Once the band gets like really hard at the top, you can push into that. It feels way different.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you can get more activation definitely that way. Because remember, activation, motor unit recruitment has a direct correlation with effort. So when you get to the top of like a banded one, you can push super hard into it. It feels easy on your joints. And like you can still use like heavy bands and do like 5 or 6 reps, and they feel absolutely fantastic. So I'm like, I'm not telling you they're superior. I'm just telling you that it's a different variation of doing the same thing, and that's why I don't get into this is better than that, whatever. Like I like cable laterals, I like dumbbell laterals, I like banded laterals. There's no one best. We are just doing a lateral raise, so just use different variations of loading with a lateral raise over time, and that's kind of a good thing about that kind of stuff. But I think these kids like this. They like to argue with people. They just want to argue, and I'm just like, they're like, well, so and so said you have to do cable lateral. I'm like, why do you have to do cable laterals with the cable set? And they'll be like, well, because of stretch. I'm like, yeah, but the lateral delt really probably does its best work somewhere around 80 to 90 degrees,
Yeah.
right? So that's when it has like this huge amount of mechanical leverage, and leverage has a degree of association with motor unit recruitment, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to get high degree of activation of a muscle that has poor leverage.
Yeah, I mean, I know you don't like anecdotes, but people disregard the shit that has worked time and time again. You know, what did all these guys do in the 70s and 80s in dumbbells and free weights? And they act like that shit can't work at this point and they have to do this
So
variation.
that was the other thing, right? It's like, and I've had to help guys recorrect. So I've talked a lot about stability, right?
Hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, I will personally choose a more stable exercise over a less stable exercise when I can. But then that goes from that to stable exercises or unstable exercises are worthless. I'm like, that's not what I said. So if you take a guy because they don't understand nuances and has been doing, let's say, starts a noob starts doing an incline dumbbell press. Well, that always looks crappy because there's a high degree of coordination
Yeah,
in a dumbbell press, right?
yeah,
But over time, if you ever watched like dudes have been lifting forever, we can do incline dumbbell presses very like you over time you have a reduction in co-contractions and you have neurological adaptations that occur to where you improve the stability, the internal stability of that exercise so that it can become more effective,
yeah,
right? So is it always going to be that degree of coordination needed is always going to be there, but it reduces over time very significantly. So you look at a guy like Ronnie Coleman doing incline flat dumbbell bench presses, dude. Like you can't tell me he's having this major stability issue, right? Like he's did was it the flat dumbbells and the incline dumbbells like 200 pounders for reps and total control, like doing kind of that what I talk about, like the half rep and Ronnie Coleman. But I actually think he did those in such a super strong controlled way. I think he did like was it like 12 reps with the 200s or some shit like that? It was something wild.
I don't know.
But but you can't tell me Ronnie didn't have good stability on that exercise.
Yeah, yeah,
So the kids lose this. I'm like, now if you're telling me you're like, Paul, you have to choose. I'm like, I'm going to choose a more stable exercise. So if you get real granular with the conversations, a more stable exercise that has an ideal resistance profile and a specific ideal motion. I'm like, these are really. It's just a discussion point.
hmm.
It's
They take it to the extreme. It's like they don't understand the nuance. They don't actually. They hear, machines are more stable. So why would I ever do free weights? But then again, you do the free weights, you create those adaptations,
create
and that
stability, but
that
you can create
stability
stability
is
over time.
not an issue.
Yeah, definitely becomes less of an issue. And so like for a while, like I made posts, I was like, okay, in my opinion, like a converging chest press is better than non-converging, just for the simple fact that it accommodates the mechanics of the shoulder better, right? So that's a motion you want. I mean, the pecs pull the arm across the body, so
Hmm.
you would want a motion where the arm gets to come across the body because it accommodates that motion at the shoulder because that's
Hmm.
what it wants to do. But then they go, oh, so if it doesn't converge, it's worthless. I'm like, yeah, that's what I said. It's worthless. Like you could never grow pecs at all if the arm doesn't get to cross the body. That's not what I said. I'm saying if you're asking me which is a better motion, it will be the conversion. You can still grow pecs just fine on a chest press machine that does not converge.
Yeah, yeah. No, they take it all to the extreme. They come at you in the comments anytime they see you do any freeway movements. But yeah, he said, look at Ronnie, look at Nick Walker, look at the way that they're able to move the weight on a press, on a lunge versus just
And
sticking to that separate
does
dumbbell.
anybody train more methodically and awesome than Nick Walker, dude? It's just he's such a awesome to watch. His control and execution.
This is you essentially when you're doing these things, you essentially, in a sense, become the machine, right? Like you're able to move in that
Yeah.
that stable motion. Obviously, not to the same extent, but it's just you're able to really just dial in on the muscle that you're trying to execute with and eliminate all of that instability and other
Do
factors.
you know what the number one factor in me personally choosing exercises are?
How easy it is to set up.
Dude, if I have a plate loaded versus a pin loaded, that's a no brainer. I'm taking the pins. I'm taking the stack with the pin, right? And I can put a gym pin on it if I have to. One of the reasons why I really hate barbell movements anymore, for the most part, is I always feel like barbell movements are some of the harder ones to set up, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got to put the barbell in a specific place, and you got to put plates on it. Anything that's like I got a stack on it with a pin, I'm just like that's what I'm going to choose. And generally, for the most part, I would say machines give you good enough motions that it's going to work. So, and
Hmm.
I think the kids get into like these, like these really, they try to get way too, like, well, let's remember back when everybody was like doing everything, like every lap motion was that stupid cable, sagittal plane cable pull, like that was the only thing that worked last. And then they try to get too perfect with
Hmm.
everything. And I'm like, your motion just needs to be good enough.
Yeah, they missed the forest for the trees.
Yes. And I'm
Yeah.
like, it just needs to be good enough. Can you load it? Can
Yeah.
you load it? Like,
Yeah.
does it have loading ability? Like all those kids that were doing like kneeling pull downs, I'm like, you can't load that, bro.
Hmm.
It's got limited loading potential.
And then they also don't take into consideration that not all machines are built the same. Some machines, just based on your structure, might not be the best suited
Might
for
not
you.
fit you at all. One of
Yeah.
the things I don't like about some of the hammer chest press machines is that they absolutely feel horrible on my mechanic, personal mechanics. So that's 100% true too. So I'm like, so does the machine, is it good enough motion, and does it feel good when you perform it? And I know that's even, you say I don't like anecdotes. I like certain kinds of anecdotes. Does it feel good? So when you do this motion, sometimes you use a machine, you're like, man, that feels wonky.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like
And you're
shit.
just like, I don't like that machine. And then other people will use it and they'd be like, oh, I love that machine. And I'm
Yeah.
like, something is different for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And you say you have somebody who could barbell squat, right? They can barbell squat good ass to grass. They get good knee flexion, but then the alternative is a shitty hack squat where they can't get that adequate knee flexion. The ones where the pads are the placement is far away from the actual thing you go
There's
into.
lots of there. I like hack squats, but there's lots of hack squat machines I don't like.
Yeah,
And
so
I
it's
get on them and I'm like, this thing feels like ass.
yeah, so it's like the person thinks, oh, just because it's a machine, it's better. But it's like, no, if you could do the barbell squat and actually get the form you want, you're probably better off
But I
using this
tell
barbell
people
squat.
that I'm like, you can't tell me that Tom Platts didn't intuitively gravitate towards doing squats because he was built for squats. So you take a guy that's got short little femurs and a long torso, can stay completely upright, maximize knee flexion, and not get really any forward lean. Dude, that's going to be a normal squat would be fantastic for a guy like that,
Hmm.
right? Like Chris Bumstead said his favorite quad exercise was a Smith machine squats.
Hmm.
Like he did okay. He had okay quads.
Yeah, yeah. But even if you're not built for them too, right? Like you could, if somebody has limited access to equipment, you can modify a barbell or Smith machine squat. You could use heel elevation. For a lot of people, that will get them in the right position.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Those are fun, like more like what I consider like more nuanced. You don't need to be so black and white about so many of these things. I don't like this. So where I get in is I don't like the people will be like, just pick stuff up and put it down. The basics work. I'm like, no, that's also some brain dead bullshit. Let's think a
Mhm.
little tougher than just like picking stuff up and putting it down.
Yeah.
That's what gets people into doing stuff like saying like deadlifts are going to grow your back. I'm like, no, there's a much better option than doing deadlifts for your back. And then they use anecdotes and go, well, all these guys that did deadlifts like had huge backs. I'm like, they were also doing really heavy rows. So you can't, you know what I mean? Like it's not like somebody just went and picked up a deadlift and grew like a big back. You need to do anything for your lats, and then it's clearly like an adductor magnus and glute exercise. So
Hmm.
there's nothing that's attached to the spine that's doing hip extension,
Yeah.
right? It's a hip extension exercise. So I say like what's I think there are definitely some better tools. And then somebody go, Paul said deadlifts won't build your back. I was like, I didn't say that. If you
Hmm.
have no traps at all, and you do deadlifts, you'll probably get some traps because they still have to, stabilize, help they help create stability for your spine. They stabilize the scapula. They pull the scapula a little bit into retraction at the top, and then the erectors definitely get quite a bit of work.
Hmm.
So I'm saying you need to have nuanced conversations about that stuff. I think there's some things that are good, much better tools than others. I wouldn't tell a guy to do deadlifts he want to grow his traps. I'd be like, do row a chest supported row
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. But did we touch on the whole food thing? Do you want to touch on that?
on the what?
On the whole calorie thing? Did we even talk about that? I don't even remember.
No, no, we didn't talk about it. We can go over it.
Yeah, let's just briefly touch on
We
it.
can we can yeah we can briefly touch on it because we've already been going like 2 hours and 15.
Yeah.
So basically, when I explain some of these things to you off on the side, and I won't tell everybody because the conversations that I see going on online are wrong.
As far as
So
what?
Most people do not understand all of the different interference mechanisms that can happen with your diet, as far as like what's going on with motor unit recruitment, what's going on with a reduction in force production, which means mechanical tension is not happening at certain fibers. And then the difference in what we see going on with the addition of new actual functional proteins that happen from protein, actual, protein ingestion. And then the thing that matters the least is the actual energy, which is
Hmm.
the calories. So when people say, like the arguments I see online are so dumb. We have one study that looked at calories at maintenance versus calories in 5 and 15% surpluses, and the group that was at maintenance grew just the same as the groups that were in a surplus.
Hmm.
So I would love to see more studies done, because I don't do, like, I'm not going to say, well, that's one study settles the debate. It doesn't end the debate. I would love to see several other studies that are looking at stuff. So, like, say, what do we see in a 5% deficit versus maintenance plus a 5 or 10% surplus, and kind of look kind of the contrast that's going on there between different degrees of caloric intake. However, I know from looking at all the data, the caloric intake is the least important problem here, or the least important of the variables.
Yeah.
So you can have, that's why we have multiple studies on keto now that show you really can't grow muscle on keto, because, like I said, we have interference mechanisms that happen um, in those type of dietary restrictions. And even the keto and surplus shows it doesn't really grow muscle. So it's not a, when I say the energy issue is not the factor, that's a really good example. So if you can have plenty, and you could actually even do, you could do, like a diet that, say, you could have other problems with adding muscle if your macros are not set up correctly, even if you weren't doing keto. Once I started looking at onto all, and nobody talked about these. Once I started really looking, because I'm more mechanistically driven, and that's why generally I get most of these longitudinal studies. I can predict them and tell you what's going on with them correctly. Everybody has to come back later for the most part and be like, okay, you got all that right. So right now, there's still people saying that you it's an energy in versus energy out issue, and it's really not. And some people will say, well, it's, energy cannot be created or destroyed, blah blah blah. I'm like, it doesn't matter. There's other issues going on.
Uh,
So the one piece of data we really don't have it, and I thought for sure we'd have it, but we don't, is how much energy does it take to create a pound of muscle? So a pound of muscle is like 600 calories.
not a lot.
It's like 600 calories. It's like 125 grams of protein in a pound of muscle, right? So if you look, how many, and I think when I say it was Justin Harris, you brought up Justin Harris, talked about the fact that he knew we could only assimilate and synthesize a very small degree of, like, functional proteins on a day-to-day basis. It's really small. And then you only need so many actual proteins coming in dietary wise to do that.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at like a very advanced person, like you and I were talking about in the kind of preliminary talks, let's say you were looking at gaining, your advanced, whether you're on or off, I don't care, whether you're on gear or not. Um, if you were going to put on 3 pounds of muscle in, say, a year, that literally comes out, when you break it down to the actual added grams in a day, it's like 1 to 2 grams a day.
Yeah. I think Justin said it was four, but
You,
yeah, but
four would give you more than that, right? But you could. What I'm saying is, if it's a beginner, it'd be more. It'd be more. It'd be like, it could be somewhere around 5 to 6 grams.
yeah.
But the point is, we don't have a study showing us how many calories it takes to synthesize those new proteins so that they're part of the myofibrils, right? So you'd have to imagine, like, so you can't say a protein or 600 calories. That's a dumb way to approach
Well, I
it.
don't think you could even conduct a study that would show that because there's so much nuance across individuals.
You could probably get to, the whole point is you could get into like a ballpark, right? So
Yeah.
like we kind of know, like, if you do so much activity, if you weigh so much, what kind of activity you're doing, the intensity level, all that kind of stuff kind of gives you an idea of, right, the number of calories that you use to do that. So we could probably get into a ballpark of what it is. But I'll say this, is the body's very efficient. Go think, if you go do a whole bunch of activity, Well, if you do an hour of cardio, you don't ever end up burning as many calories as you think. It's right. It's going to be anywhere between like 400 and 500 calories for an hour, right? So it's not a lot.
Mhm.
The body's super efficient. So how many calories do you think it probably takes to add 1 to 2 grams of functional proteins a day?
It doesn't take as many as people think. I know. I mean, obviously, I work with people, so there is nuance just based on their metabolic function. You know, there's some people who just burn through food rapidly, but obviously that means technically their maintenance is higher for that individual. But when I'm ever making a diet for anybody, I never look at anything in terms of am I in maintenance, am I in a surplus, maybe like in a deficit. Obviously, like I'm taking into consideration if we're focusing on fat loss and cutting, but like all I'm thinking about is how can I program this to make sure that they're getting the most use out of the nutrients, have them timed effectively around peri workout, and then watching how they respond. If I see that the scale is moving up too fast, then there's too much food for them. It's really that simple. I'm not thinking, oh, they need to be in more of a surplus or less of a surplus. It's just like, what are they doing with this food? How is it affecting their performance in the gym? And what is the aftermath?
I think the reason there's a multitude of reasons why that this stuff, like it's literally old bro myth stuff, and it won't die. And there's like a ton of reasons. We'd have to do a whole other podcast on all the different reasons, right? But it's an emotional based argument because I spent almost a full month really going over this data, and I'm like, okay, you're dealing with some physiological interference limiters. And then the last thing I was like, okay, the calories in versus calories out, or the calories coming in that you need to support growing is so small.
Yeah.
So here's the other part. So here's the dumb one that I keep reading. So like you can't get from like 170 to 200 pounds on this like the same calorie. I'm like, who said that?
No,
That's the
because
dumbest thing I've ever.
your
I'm
maintenance
like,
would change.
your maintenance would change. I'm like, why are you using that as an example? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you're at 170, okay, and you put on, let's say over the course of the year, let's say you're at maintenance at 170 and you put on that 2 pounds or 3 pounds over the course of the year. Over the course of that year, your maintenance calories, you would recalculate and they would go up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you would say, okay, somebody say, oh, well, you're in a surplus. I'm like, no, you adjust your maintenance. But here's the thing, Seb, is that your body is kind of already accounting for those calories because when you're at maintenance, that means your maintenance is based on your TDEE, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
your it's everything, right? So if you're lifting weights and you're accounting for calories for lifting weights, doing your cardio, your NEAT, all that kind of stuff, you already have the calories coming in to support this minuscule amount of like synthesizing new functional proteins that are needed.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you start adding tissue. Naturally, your appetite would increase because your energy expenditure is increasing. But how
Mm-hmm.
much is it going to increase by? Not very much. Literally, I've done the math on the very limited day we have. It's something like 16 calories. It's like 16 calories. So I'm like, okay, so we're out here. Somebody go, well, I just put them above at like 150. I'm like, but they don't even need that buck 50. You can adjust it within literally like something like a fit like a 25 to 50 calorie range.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are going to take this and just like start to try to overthink it a lot. And again, it's going to be the whole thing where they miss the forest for the trees. And when I'm looking at this and when I'm thinking of what to do with a person, you got to take into consideration what that person's day to day life is like, obviously, and that's always going to affect the number that they're going to get. People think they're just going to plug into a number in a calculator and then say, "Oh, it's 2,700 calories, so I'm going to stay at 2,700 calories for a year now, and that's how I'm going to get 200 pounds." And obviously, we're saying that's not the case. That's where this misinterpretation is coming from.
It would go. I mean, that's what I mean. That was the dumbest one that I kept hearing. It was
Yeah,
like, so you're saying, and then of course the straw man comes because I'm like, where did I say that? You're saying that if you're a 170, how do you get to 200 pounds? I'm like, well, your calories would increase.
mm-hmm.
I'm like, when I say you can grow at maintenance, I'm saying whatever your maintenance is right now. And of course, there's caveats to
There's
this
a
too.
range.
Yeah, but not only that, but like if a guy is really underweight and super skinny, I'm gonna have to tell him, dude, you need to eat to just get to like a healthy weight. You
Yeah,
know,
of course.
so there's kind of a range if you're trying to grow, if you're not cutting and in a deficit, in my opinion, your maintenance is your growth range.
Yeah.
So you're working. If you're that means the point is you're not eating um, to add to grow to make the scale go up. You're not eating to add adipose tissue that's not functional proteins, right? So so do you need a surplus to do that? And the answer to that is no. And
Hmm.
if somebody wants to make the case of this, that the answer to that is yes, we need more data to come out to show. Here's the other thing: somebody has to, yes, to show myofibrillar protein synthesis rates somehow are elevated either higher or longer in a surplus than they would be when you're already getting the proper adequate intake of protein that you're getting at zero point 0.8 grams per pound of body weight to a gram per pound, whatever range you want to shoot in. We have
I'm
protein.
not gonna. You're gonna say that. I'm not gonna say that.
What?
The 0.81
Well, we have tons of protein overfeeding studies that show they do nothing.
for naturals.
Yeah, and it's not like anecdotally, Paul Barnett, who, like I said, one thing he said he didn't even his last 3 years where he was from 47 to 50. That's how old he was. His progress was freaking phenomenal. He told me he never got close to a gram of protein per pound a day.
He never got close to a gram of protein per pound a day.
No,
I don't know. I mean, I know Patrick Tour's big on that. He's big on the lower protein. But
I
then
just
again, it's like if you look at like that study where people were saying, "Oh, you can eat like one meal a day and have protein synthesis elevated," essentially because they did in that post workout
no, but
window.
that's no. But that's like if you follow real nutritional guys, they'll tell you you can't.
No, I'm saying that's bullshit, right? But you take that into context now. Essentially, when you're on anabolics, it's like you have that higher cap 24/7. Essentially,
Yeah, but that's the idea that you're somehow. So we have the two studies where they used, the two steroid studies, and those guys grew at phenomenal rates, and they weren't eating a whole bunch of protein; they were eating a normal diet. I don't think that I don't think kind of like the training because a lot of people thought for training, my challenge was send me research that shows that steroids speed up recovery. Nobody ever sent me a damn thing because there's one study that I got that was it was DECA with rats, and I was like that's regeneration. So that makes sense because what I think is happening with downstream signaling and anabolics is that the myofibrils grow at a very accelerated rate, and then we get some hyperplasia.
uh huh.
So that's probably a lot of what we're because they speculate that in some of the studies they've done that steroid users have hyperplasia, and so that would make sense. So in the rat studies that they've seen where they tried to speculate there was recovery, it was regeneration. So regeneration will fall under similar to what we'd see in like hyperplasia stuff. So those really look similar. So I don't think they're with steroids that pounding a bunch of extra protein. I don't think it's going to do anything. Um, and I don't think guys in the 70s were eating like outrageous amounts of protein. I know, like, I know what I think is like you're going to grow based on your response at the basically at the androgen receptor level, like the magnitude of the signal that you get that's downstream from there, no different than like mechanical tension is happening with mechanotransduction. So I don't think that the idea of like, well, I'm on so I'm going to pound so much more protein, so I'm going to grow faster. I don't really see that. I think that you could have like a small uptick in protein intake, but I don't think it's going to be overly. I don't think it's going to be significant. Nobody needs like a gram and a half. That's stupid.
You think so?
A gram. The only time I could see like a gram and a half per pound is during dieting phases.
We also have the ideas like of the fact that protein is more uh, thermogenic.
Yeah, I think during a dieting phase, and I always come back to the physiology that we have with like natural guys first. So during a dieting phase, like I think they've shown like 1 point, it's like 1.2 tends to be a little more advantageous. I'd have to go back and revisit, look at that data again. But like this idea that you need to get like through, like I said, Paul Barnett, he grew and dieted and everything. He said he never even got close to a gram a day.
I don't think it's a matter of need. I think it's a matter of what is the ability to assimilate more when androgens are in place. What is actually that difference? I don't think we know. So I think it's just always a case of wanting to play it safe and potentially, if there is more room, maximize it if it is even there, because we can't say for sure like that you're not going to get anything else more out of it.
I mean, I don't think it's like a detrimental. I think it's just like anything else. I think there's always a point of diminishing returns if you start doing stuff in large amounts. So it's no different than steroids. Like when I was on, I didn't notice anything. I didn't get anything out of using more than 750 milligrams of test a week.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to push that dose a few times to see what would happen. Nothing, literally nothing happened.
Yeah.
I just felt worse. So there's always a point of diminishing returns. So like if I know what you're saying, you're just like, well, I want to play it safe with a client who's competing or doing whatever. I'm like, sure, that's fine. I don't think you're hurting the person. I don't. If there's a benefit, then the thermic effect during a dieting phase could help because you're going to get, like I said, I think if you're looking at 25% of the calories ingested by protein basically used for digestion, and you're eating 300 grams of protein a day, that's like adding on almost like another cardio session
Yeah.
to the day, right? So like you're getting a nice caloric burn from eating the extra protein. What I'm saying is, you don't need to worry about preserving muscle tissue on steroids. So it's not a muscle preservation thing that you're getting with higher protein amounts. So that's not occurring.
Mm-mm.
That's not
No.
a reason. And you're definitely not growing during that time. So that's not it. So I think the only thing that you're really left with is really high protein amounts for a guy that's on gear is you're definitely getting a little bit of a caloric expenditure that's happening. That I think that can help because you know this as well as I do. As far as like stage shape, the difference in the guy that's taken first and the guy that's taken last could be the difference in maybe a pound and a half of fat.
Yeah.
So any edge, it's kind of like I
Pennies out to dollars. You'd rather do
do you
everything you can.
remember? Do you remember when people were like fasted cardio doesn't do anything that like fed cardio is not doing?
I never said that.
I'm like, if you go break that data down, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a general population person, no. If you're talking to somebody that's going to get on stage and needs to be extreme levels of body fat, yes, it does.
Yes.
So there was a difference. People will say it didn't reach statistical significance. I'm like, I don't give a shit. If you're talking about a bodybuilder who's trying to get peeled, there was evidence trending way better towards using fasted cardio for getting peeled than fed cardio. Now, if you're just trying to if you're just doing your cut and you just want to get down to like 8% body fat or so for your cut, you probably don't need to get that granular with your cardio. But if you're trying to get on stage, and definitely if you're competing at like a Olympia level, you are trying to get all those little 1, 2, 3 percentages that you can.
Uh huh. Yeah.
So if you're telling me that a guy can get more peeled doing fasted cardio than fed, then I'm like, okay, then let's definitely do the fasted cardio
Yeah.
because getting that 1 or 2 pounds of fat off at the end is the hardest part.
Yeah.
So if you're telling me the fasted cardio will do that better, I remember a dude said one time when they published that study, he said, "Man, I don't know." And because, like you said earlier, I like anecdotes when they do line up appropriately with the research. So when somebody takes the research and I think they don't understand the proper practical application, that's when I'm like, okay, that's a problem. And this was one of them. And the guy said, one of the researchers published up that study and said fasted cardio doesn't, um, it's not statistically significant better at burning fat. But if you broke the study down, you would see there was a difference. Now, if it doesn't meet some p value, I don't care. It's like the length and partial study lately. If you go look at the triceps, it did favor the triceps to use a full range of motion. That should make sense to you because you're doing elbow extension, right? It's what they do. So rather than doing like a partial, when they did one of the exercises they used was the hammer strength press, and I'm like, well, yeah, because it's a tricep exercise, so you'd want to use a full range of motion there because of the triceps cross the elbow that do elbow extension. But in that study, the cardio one, there was a trend that definitely favored. I want to say it was something like I have them drawn from memory, so it was like a 3% difference. I'm like, but if you are a competitive bodybuilder, that's huge. I'm like, if you, and this guy commented who was a competitor. He goes, all I know is this. He said, I had trouble getting in as good enough condition to win my shows. And it wasn't until I switched my cardio over to fasted that I consistently started coming in peeled enough in my shows to win. And he goes, so I don't, and I was like, if you look at the study, that's what the study's showing. He was having more trouble getting that last maybe pound and a half to 2 pounds of fat off. And if the 3% difference was him getting that extra, so if a guy's taking off, 20 pounds for a show to get peeled, and then that extra, 3% is, that another pound or so, then that, as well as I do, it's really, really super granular there at stage level.
Yeah.
So having a pound and a half of fat on that you could have got off is a massive freaking difference.
Hmm.
So if doing cardio fasted helps you get that extra pound and a half or 2 pounds of fat off, then definitely do that.
Yeah.
But now,
It's not.
if you're just a dude doing a cut, just do it whenever.
I mean, I opt to have everybody do it fasted as long as it fits within their schedule. At this
I,
point,
I, I like it from I like do fasted cardio from a standpoint of exactly. Get up in the morning, you do your stuff, you go do your cardio, it's out of the way for the day.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people often are much more likely to not even do it. It just sets the tone for the day, right? And obviously, even if they're not in a prep and there's still that additional benefits, like why not do it if you have the
If you
availability
can,
too?
yeah.
Yeah.
But getting back to the bulking thing, I just think that even it's more especially for natty guys, because at some point, if the natty guy wants to do a cut, then having the least amount of body fat to take off to do his cut means he's got a much higher degree of preserving as much lean tissue as possible.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about losing tissue if you're on gear. So, but at the same time, and you've seen this as much as I have, guys who get really fat in the off season, not all of them, but some of them then later have trouble getting as lean as possible enough for the show, or they're like, oh, I didn't. They're fat. However long their prep phase is supposed to last, they were just too fat to get in shape for the show.
Yeah, people don't
So
realize how long it takes. Like you might think, oh, like I didn't get that fat, but then even I'm going to do a 16 week prep. Like that still might not be enough fucking time for you to get lean enough. Like you might need half a year to get lean enough for a show.
no, that's dude. Whenever I retire from powerlifting, I'm like, well, it's time to start doing bodybuilding again, and I have to get peeled. Dude, I had to go from like 290. That took like a year.
Yeah, you can't even tell. It's hard for you. There's no way when you're at a certain level body how long it's going to take to get
Yeah,
as lean as you need to
because
be.
sometimes when you and I talked about this, I had this cut planned, and I started doing it, and I told you, I said I literally had to come off my cut because my body was doing nothing, and I'm
Hmm.
very good at. I can tell when my body's working. And I said I was doing 12 to 15,000 steps a day, and my calories pretty much every day was somewhere around 18 to 1900. And some people don't believe that. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. And had dropped them from like 2,400 down to like 1,900.
You
And
adapt.
dude, just nothing was happening. And it was so frustrating. And then I took a week and just pushed everything back up to maintenance, put carbs back in at a higher level. And as soon as I got back on my diet, like the next week, I saw movement. Like within
Hmm.
like 5 or 6 days, I saw things started to move again.
You had a repeat.
So yeah, so I was like, there's definitely some, and I totally believe in the like it's calories in and calories out as far as like fat loss, some of that kind of stuff. But sometimes there's some you have to.
It's deeper than that.
I think that I remember when John Meadows was live, he would tell me at times that he had to increase some people's calories to get fat loss happening. And and he would say, John said privately, he goes, publicly, I tell you, it's all about calories in, calories out, and that's fat loss. He goes, but I can tell you privately, and John's not here anymore, but he goes, I can tell you privately, there's been a multitude of times where I had to increase people's calories in order to get fat loss happening. He goes,
Yeah,
I don't know
100%.
why. He goes, I don't know why that's the case with some people. He goes, if they are, maybe that they are, he's like, maybe they're overeating because their calories are too low and they're not reporting it to me. And then when I increase their calories, they stop overeating. So they actually get into a deficit. He said, or that some people adapt at whatever calorie intake I've got them at, and their body becomes very efficient at not moving because their metabolism down regulates enough to where they're just
Yeah.
like, no, I'm gonna stay here at this level, and I think
It's
that's
a survival mechanism. The body will always try to adapt, and you don't want to
we'll
bring
try to like
food down to the point where you're malnourished.
exactly. So, and he's like, he goes, sometimes he goes, at first I'd get scared and be like, man, I don't, I know it sounds weird. He goes, but he goes, I have to bring this person's calories up in order to get the body fat moving. He goes, and every time I would do that, goes, I would start seeing them lose fat. It goes, so there's definitely some. I don't say like, oh, that can't happen or whatever. I'm saying mechanistically, there's something that still fits into what works physiology wise, but you don't always know exactly what those mechanisms are, right? But
Yeah, I
sometimes
mean,
you just need to know because I remember Alan Aragon told me he said Chris Aceto, right? He's like Chris is like one of the best bro dudes there is. He goes he you know he's like that. He's just fantastic at knowing like. And I like Fred Small is one of my best friends, and Fred told me Chris would knew how to change the best shape Fred ever got in was working with Chris. And he's like, Chris would do stuff like I didn't know what the hell he was doing. He goes, I just trusted the process, and he got in the best shape. But all the contests he did, he always got in his best shape with Chris. But he said sometimes he'd like add like a giant muffin to my diet like in the morning, and I'm like, what are you doing? But he goes, but then I keep getting peeled.
yeah.
So
Well, I mean, something I do with a lot of my guys is I'll just have pre-rotate the carb cycle, right? Because it helps to
mhm.
keep metabolism in a better functioning spot. You have your really low days, and then you have your high days, so you don't ever. It's harder to create that adaptation. I'm sure, like you've done shows before, you could feel oftentimes when your metabolism starts cranking after you've been adapted, you start sweating when you eat. You just have this thermogenic
You're
effect.
like you're hot all the time.
Yeah, it's like the
Yeah,
food you just feel your body just
and
fucking working
you're
overtime.
I would always say this, man. If you're not hungry, that's usually indicative that you've adapted and there's a problem. If you're trying to
Yes.
lose fat, because people will be like, "Oh, you shouldn't be." I'm like, "No, you should be hungry. You should
Yeah.
be hungry. That is feedback that you are energy. Your body does that for a reason. It's like you need to eat food,
Yeah.
right?
Hunger is a
And
good sign.
hungry is a good sign. I always felt like hunger was a good sign that my diet was probably working correctly. I was doing things correctly. If I was never hungry, I was like, that's not good. It's kind of like when you're in prep. If you have those days, like going right close to the show, where you feel like a normal person for a while, you start freaking out. You're like, why don't I feel like shit right now? You know what I mean? And then like a few hours later, you feel like shit all over again. You're like, oh, there it is. Okay, now I
Yeah.
can relax. But you will start freaking out if you just feel like a normal person.
Yeah. No, I tell everybody hunger is a good sign, whether you're cutting and even when you're growing too. Obviously, there's nuance
Mhm.
there with the amount of ghrelin people produce and whatnot. But people think when another big mistake when they're bulking is I'm hungry, I should eat more. It's like no, you want to stay hungry. If you're constantly satiated and full, it's probably not the best sign. Hunger,
Yep.
your metabolism is working. You're going to stay leaner. You're not. It's what you want in almost every scenario.
Yeah, there should. I agree. There should be probably even if you're in, like I said, working at trying to grow and you're working in a at maintenance. There should be probably some degree of like I'm a little bit hungry. That's like not you're not hungry like you are in a dieting phase or a contest prep phase, but some degree of like I'm a little bit hungry pretty
Yeah.
often,
You
right?
remember the days you gotta eat like a dog. You're shoveling food down. You feel lethargic. You want to throw up. Your gut health is in the gutter. Like that's not helping you. That's not help.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at with the whole like even I grew up on that stuff and believed it for a long time, but then when you actually start breaking down all the physiology, you're like, man, that was so worthless.
It's literally counterproductive in a lot of
That
aspects.
is so bad. Like you're just constantly on the pot. Like like you said, it's like you're full all the time. Where do you think all those calories are going, bro? They're just
Hmm.
going to make you fat.
Yeah. But another thing I will point out to that is because a lot of these kids come into this and they have never actually followed a diet. So sometimes even if you might not be pushing food from a caloric standpoint to the point where it's bad, but like when you're eating maybe 3,000 calories of whole food, you might not be the most hungry at first. Like you got to adapt to it and you got to pick up the fork still.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Bulking, quote unquote, bulking is really easy if you're eating shit food.
Yeah.
But if you do, I don't think people realize if you go and you're trying to eat like potatoes and rice and chicken breast and fish, like 3,500 calories of that is a lot.
Yeah, it's a good amount of food.
It's a lot, man. It's like go sit down and map out your diet and do 3,500 calories using, you know,
without a shit ton of fat. Without
without, yeah, keep the fat low. Keep the fat to say 10 to 15% of the diet. And then map that out and see what happens. You're going to be dealing with a lot of calories. It's a lot of food. Like
volume,
a
yeah.
lot of the volume wise, yeah, it's a lot. So, and I don't think that nobody can do that for very long because it's difficult. So they go right into shit eating. They go right to
Mhm.
shit loading and start eating a bunch of high calorie dense foods. Then they put on a bunch of body fat and they're like, oh, well, I'm bulking. I'm like, no, you're stupid.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to close this out.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to touch on here? We've been running for 2 hours and 45 minutes.
No, I felt like we covered all the big hitters in the first half. It's almost like we went from our social media ranting to actually getting into like some good stuff for training and nutrition stuff.
Perfect. So anything you got going on you want to plug before we hop off?
No, just my usuals. If anybody doesn't want to be a freeloader and actually get fantastic training stuff and come into any of my groups, I have all my groups, my 4 groups: Garage Gangsters, Yoke Squad, Yoke Buds, and Valkyrie. So those can all be found on my link in bio, social media, so forth and so on, as everybody says.
All right, well, there you have it. Thanks for coming on, Paul. Make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below if there's any feedback or questions you have regarding anything here. And we'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding. Peace out.